Police have launched a murder inquiry after 3 men were found shot dead in Essex. A farmer discovered the bodies this morning in a Range Rover parked on a farm track near Chelmsford.
The 3 dead men were known criminals: Patrick Tate, Craig Rolfe and Anthony Tucker. All 3 had convictions from drug dealing to armed robbery.
3 men assassinated with pump-action shotguns, each murdered in cold blood with bullet wounds to the head.
There is no doubt that the 3 victims, known criminals, had met their deaths in a Range Rover after a pre-arranged rendezvous.
Michael Steele, who dubbed himself the Angel of Death, he's said to have laughed uncontrollably after killing the men. Jack Wones, his right-hand man. The pair were trapped by Darren Nichols, the driver of the killer's getaway car, who turned supergrass. It was his evidence that would prove crucial in the conviction of the 2 men. As a result, he's now been given a change of identity and is being protected at a safe house by the police.
By October 1995, Michael Steele had 2 successful drug runs under his belt and had earned around £50,000 in smuggling fees alone. It was time to start enjoying the spoils of his life of crime. He spotted a dilapidated bungalow on the outskirts of Clacton called Meadow Cottage, which was in prime location but in appalling condition, needing rewiring, new plumbing, new ceilings, plastering the lot. The price was low enough for Steele to get a mortgage based purely on the income from his building businesses, MJS Trading, without arousing any suspicion. But once there, Steele could happily spend as much as he wanted, turning it into his dream home. The total price was £80,000. Steele put down £20,000 in cash and took out a loan for the rest. The bungalow was empty. The previous owner had been shipped off into a nursing home. So once contacts were exchanged, he began spending more and more time there, planning the changes he wanted to make and getting quotes from various workmen. Having lost virtually everything just a few years earlier, everything was starting to fall back into place. Michael Steele was back on the rise. Elsewhere in the county, another Essex villain was also celebrating a return to form. Nearly a year after being sent back to prison for smuggling the gun into hospital, Pat Tate was out and lighting up the town with a massive round of wild parties and drug benders. The biggest of the celebrations took place at Tucker's brand new mansion in Fobbing, going under the name of Brymount Lodge. The £250,000 luxury hacienda-style bungalow came complete with a stunning view of the countryside and stables. In the front garden, there was a full-size statue of a naked goddess, and 6-foot-high Greek urns adorned the wall. In the garage block, Tucker kept his Porsche and the brand new Mercedes that he'd bought to replace the Jaguar. The property had electronic security gates, a sophisticated video intercom system, and was even patrolled by guard dogs at night. And Tucker had bought the lot for cash. The day of the party started off in the highest of spirits. One of the many pictures taken shows Pat Tate, Mickey Steele and Jackie Street all together. Tate had an enormous smile on his face and looks relaxed in an open-necked denim shirt. Steele was standing with his hand on his hip and is also grinning broadly. Between the 2 men, looking like a rag doll, is Jackie Street, kicking up one of her legs like a tiller girl. Soon after the picture was taken, Steele took Tate to one side to discuss business. Steele explained that he was planning another drugs run in a couple of weeks' time, wanted to offer Tate the chance to buy into it. Tate asked how much Steele would charge for importing, and then balked at the £330 per kilo price, saying it was way too much. It would leave him with little profit for selling the drugs over here. Steele calmly explained that was his way of smuggling. There was virtually no risk. The chances of a customs patrol boat coming across his little rib on his way back from Blankenberg was less than 0. He should know, he'd done it 1,000 times. Sure, it might seem cheaper to pay some bozo to pile the stuff up in his boat and drive it through customs, but what with the sniffer dogs, x-rays and the like, there was at least a 1 in 10 chance of getting pulled. It would be a false economy. Eventually the pair agreed on a price of £300 per kilo, and Tate promised to get some money to Steele in the next few days. What Tate had failed to let on, however, was that he didn't actually have any money. Having just got out, he needed most of what he had stashed away to buy himself a car, pay for a few bills, and support the flashy lifestyle he was now living. Tucker had given him control over a couple of clubs, but the profits from those would take time to arrive. The sensible thing to do was to pull out of the deal and wait, but Tate wasn't about to start being sensible. In fact, since being out of prison, he'd been getting increasingly out of control and paranoid. He began to fear he was being left behind Tucker and Rolfe. The two of them had killed Whitaker in his absence and had set up profitable deals of their own. Tucker, in particular, with his house, cars and horses, seemed to be raking it in. Even Rolfe was doing well, having paid £80,000 cash for Tucker's old detached house in Chafford Hundred. And while Tucker had offered Tate a place in his organisation, Tate knew this was more down to friendship than anything else. Tate wanted to prove himself every bit as good as the others, and the money he could make out of the deal with Steele could be a great start. So rather than wait and miss out, Tate decided to take advantage of the friendships he'd made in prison, where he'd become great pals with the likes of a well-known cop killer, two brothers from an Essex family known as the Joneses, who always had plenty of ready cash knocking about, and Ronnie Knight. The Joneses are the sort of villains whom every hardened members of the criminal underworld go out of their way to avoid. Totally ruthless, fearless and efficient, the fact that few people have heard of them or their dominance of towns like Romford is testament to the power they wield. When Tate approached them, he made an offer they simply wouldn't be able to resist. Basically, if they lent him £40,000 for 2 weeks, it'd give them back £50,000, guaranteed. No one wants to look a gift horse in the mouth. The answer had to be yes. Hands were shaken. The money was duly handed over, and that was that. Tate was back in business. The parties continued, and so did the drug binges. Everyone gets a bit crazy when they get out of prison, living life to the full and all that. But Tate was taking it to the limit and then some. It got to the stage where Tate himself was no longer calling the tune, the drugs were. Halfway through his official getting out bash at a snooker hall in Dagenham, a few days after the deal with Steele had been struck, Tate ran out of cocaine. He decided that he needed more, and knowing he had plenty stashed near his home, he asked one of his guests to drive him over to his place. The man had been drinking heavily, and knew he was in no fit state to be behind the wheel of a car, so he refused. It was the wrong answer. Tate pulled the man to one side and pulled a gun on him. Get in your fucking car and drive me back to my fucking house, otherwise I'll fucking kill ya. The man reluctantly agreed. Half an hour or so later, mission accomplished, the pair returned to the party. Tate got out of his car and made his way back to the door, before noticing that the man who had driven him home was following close behind. "Where the fuck do you think you're going?" said Tate. "You ain't coming back here. Fuck off. Go on, fuck off, as I shoot ya." Sarah Saunders had been Pat Tate's lover for more than 6 years, but during all of that time, the couple were only actually together for a year and a half. I saw a side of Pat that no one else saw. I was really in love with him. He had a terrific personality, but he was always in prison. Sarah had been there when Tate had robbed the Happy Eater restaurant in Basildon. She had been there when he jumped the dock at Bellerickie Magistrates Court to make his bid for freedom. She had been there when he was captured and sentenced to 10 years for robbery and drugs offences. She'd even been there when Tate had been shot for the first time. The pair had a son, conceived when Tate was on day release from Hornsey Bay. But despite Tate doting on his child and providing for Sarah when he was away, the strain of separation eventually proved too much. When he got out of prison for the last time, we would just row a lot. He started taking lots of drugs, and it was really affecting his personality. He wasn't the same bloke I'd fallen in love with. I hardly recognised him. Sarah had been wanting to leave for some time, but was too scared and felt she had nowhere to go. The situation continued to deteriorate, and finally reached rock bottom soon after the Dagenham party. After a furious argument, Tate stormed out and told her it was all over. She was no longer welcome in his house, and had better not be there when he came back. In desperation, Sarah called the boyfriend of a close friend of hers, who lived a few streets away. He turned up in his car, helped Sarah grab a few things, and took her away to stay with them that night. The following morning, there was only one person Sarah wanted to call: Michael Steele. Whilst Tate had been in prison, the person he trusted most of his money was Michael Steele. Tate had put him in charge of around £23,000 and given him strict instructions to dish it out to Sarah as and when it was needed to pay for bills and buy things for their son. The pair had got to know each other once Steele was in prison, and she became very pally with Jackie Street. As the months went by, So the friendship between Steele and Saunders developed. As soon as he heard the news about her being kicked out, Steele began to help her set up a new home. Over the next few weeks, Steele busied himself working on making his new house into a home. Having discovered what seemed like 50 years worth of rubbish in his barn, Steele enlisted the help of a few of his friends to help clear the place out. The pile of old boxes, pallets and bamboo sticks that emerged was nearly 20 feet high and just crying out to be turned into a bonfire. Guy Fawkes night was just around the corner, so Steele planned a big party to coincide with him becoming the legal owner of the house. It was soon after the work on Meadow Cottage started that Tate called Steele at his home and told him to speak to him again in 10 minutes. Both men were paranoid about their home phones being tapped, so they'd taken the number of the 2 public call boxes nearest their homes. Whenever they needed to talk business, they would make a quick call and then rush over to the payphone. More than once, Tate would cut off whoever was using the payphone and tell them to fuck off. No one ever tried to argue. 10 minutes after they first spoke, the pair were talking again. "I've got that money here," said Tate excitedly. "How soon can you go?" Eventually, the man calmed down and reluctantly gave his name, Michael Steele. When no one reacted, no one instantly reached for the handcuffs. He seemed almost surprised. Just after 2:30 a.m, on the 8th of November 1995, Essex Police Constables Crick and Cohen were called to Felixstowe Ferry car park to investigate a report of 3 men landing a boat in suspicious circumstances. The pair arrived to find a blue D-Reg Range Rover attached to a trailer with a large inflatable boat on it in the car park close to the sailing club. The side lights of the Range Rover were on and the doors were open, but there was no one around. PC Cohen was examining the vehicle, making a note of the large iron bar that had been placed between the front seats, when someone came running over from the direction of the cedar fences. "Oh," said the man, slowing down when he realised that he was dealing with 2 policemen. "I thought someone was trying to steal my motor." "So all these items belong to you, do they, sir?" asked PC Crick. "Well, the boat is, but the Range Rover belongs to my brother. We've just been out diving, me, my brother and Gordon Stevens. You just missed my brother. He drove off about 10 minutes ago. He's got all the wetsuits and diving gear with him. Diving? In the middle of the night? What's the point? You can't see anything." The man scratched his head for a second. "Well, the thing is, the water's not that clear anyway, so it's just as good as night as it is during the day. But anyway, we didn't get much diving in. We had a bit of trouble with the boat. That's why we're out so late." "I see. And what would your name be, sir?" asked PC Crick. "Womes," came the reply. "Jack Womes." Just then a second man appeared by the slope over the embankment, but vanished again as soon as he saw what was going on. PC Cohen rushed over to try and find him. At the top of the slope, he looked to his left and saw lights on in a wooden beach cabin. He could see a man standing by the window looking at him and walked to have a word. The man identified himself as Gordon Stevens and, according to Cohen, behaved in a way that looked evasive and uncomfortable. He said he'd helped a couple of people who'd had difficulty with their boat on the sandbank, but didn't know their names. PC Cohen asked if he could look inside the house to see if anybody was there. Stevens refused. By now, other police officers were starting to arrive, and they escorted the 2 men who'd been hovering around the nearby sand dunes to PC Cohen. Both men refused to give their names. One of them was in a furious mood. "Why the hell have you surrounded this bloke's house with police officers? He hasn't done anything wrong. This is his home, for fuck's sake. Don't you people have any respect?" Eventually, the man calmed down and reluctantly gave his name, Michael Steele. When no one reacted, no one instantly reached for the handcuffs. He seemed almost pleased. As far as the police were concerned, he wasn't one of the men who had been in the boat with Jack Womes. He clearly knew Gordon Stevens, but that was the only connection they could come up with. He was pretty much free to do what he wanted. Once Steele had relented and given his name, the man who was with him finally agreed to do the same. He was Peter Corey. The police now concentrated their efforts on Womes. It was his boat after all, and they needed his permission in order to search it. Nothing was found, so Womes was told to wait until the custom officers arrived. While Steele and Corey simply wandered in and out of Stephen's house, chatting quietly to one another. With hindsight, it might have seemed a little naive, but at the time the officers at the scene thought they were doing the right thing. There didn't appear to be anything in the boat, and although the men were acting a little suspiciously, there really didn't seem to be anything going on. When Steele asked if he could start cleaning the boat to prevent the salt deposits building up on it, they saw no reason to say no to him. And so it was that customs officers arrived some 20 minutes later and saw their sworn enemy, the man they had vowed would never make them look stupid again, washing down his flashy new boat with a bucket of hot soapy water that Steele got the treatment he'd been expecting all night long. There was a chorus of screams, "Get that man the fuck away from that boat!" and Steele and the others were dragged away in handcuffs. At 4:25 a.m, Steele, Worms and Corey were all arrested for being concerned in the importation of drugs. The process of gathering evidence against them began. Back in Basildon, Tony Tucker was having a sleepless night. He wasn't worried about stealing the drugs. As far as he was concerned at the time, everything was going according to plan, and his little £15,000 investment was about to double in value. Tucker was nervous because the previous evening he'd performed the ultimate act of friendship. He'd given Pat Tate the keys to his black Porsche so he and his new girlfriend Lizzie could go for a spin down to Southend. Tucker was in a difficult position. Tate was his best friend and a fully grown man. You couldn't treat him like a child. But then again, Tate had only been out of prison for a couple of weeks and was smack bang in the middle of his hedonistic bender where he was burning a candle at both ends and living life to the limit, rather like an irresponsible teenager. So irresponsible in fact that despite the fact he was driving his best friend's valuable and cherished sports car, Tate had spent most of the day indulging in his favourite cocktail, Special K and cocaine. The result was inevitable. On the edge of the A127, he lost control and smashed head first into a set of railings, instantly converting Tucker's pride and joy into a twisted heap of scrap metal. By then, Tucker had heard that Steele had been arrested, but he had no idea what was going on. When Tate phoned to tell him about his car, he started ranting and raving, screaming out abuse. That fucking bastard, all he's trying to do is impress some silly young tart. Tucker was even more pissed off because Tate, still high on the drugs cocktail, couldn't stop giggling. Even when he explained that he'd been arrested on suspicion of having stolen the car, driving without insurance and driving under the influence, he'd break into a big belly of laughs every few sentences. Then to rub salt into the wounds, a still giggling Tate asked whether Tucker wouldn't mind getting into his other cars, driving down to Southend police station and giving him a lift home. Under the circumstances, it was almost a pleasure for Tucker, on his arrival, to tell Tate that Steele had been arrested. Although Tucker stood to lose some cash, Tate had put more than £55,000 in the deal, most of it borrowed from the notorious Joneses brothers. If the deal had gone belly up, Tate was going to have to find the cash to repay the debt right away. Tate went very quiet. Revenge. Tucker then said he'd arrange for someone to come and get him before slamming the phone down and calling Craig Rolfe. By the time we got there, it was obvious that Tate knew about Steele being arrested. Rolfe's girlfriend Donna Jaggers told the police later. He had the most money in the deal and he was anxious to find out what was going on. He couldn't make the call when he was banged up, so as soon as he got in the car he grabbed Craig's mobile and called Jackie Street. She told him that everything was safe and immediately he seemed to calm down a lot. But it only lasted a few minutes. Once he was sure his investment was safe, Tate soon began to get hyped up once more. He demanded to know if Rolfe had any more cocaine or ecstasy on him, and then insisted they make a detour to find some. When Jaggers protested that she and Craig had plans for the evening, Tate suddenly exploded in a fit of rage. He started smashing his fists up and down on the dashboard, screaming at the top of his lungs that all he wanted was a good time, and they shouldn't be so uptight. It was like watching a kid having a tantrum. Then Tate started bragging about all the deals he had in place, about how rich he was going to be in just a few days' time, how he was going to set up his own smuggling ring with his brother and hire a new, cheaper pilot than Steele to bring the stuff over, how he was going to get a bigger house, a brand new Merc, how he'd even buy Tucker a new Porsche to make up for the one he trashed. Whatever planet Tate was living on, It certainly wasn't Earth. Just after 6 p.m, more than 12 hours after being arrested, Jack Williams found himself sitting opposite Customs Officer Rodney Sales. Having been friendly and talkative earlier that morning, when he thought he might be able to bluff his way out of trouble, Williams now resorted to a classic criminal technique, the no comment interview. Right, Mr. Williams, what I want to ask you about the events at about 3 o'clock, 2:30 this morning, but really I want to start yesterday afternoon, and I want to start with the other people if I may. Do you know Michael John Steele? Silence. Is that no reply? If it's going to be a no reply, can you say no reply, or it'll be all me? Jack cleared his throat. No comment. No comment, alright. Do you know Gordon Edward Stevens? No comment. Do you know Peter Corey? No comment. I feel bloody stupid asking you this, but do you know your brother John? Williams? No comment. Now come on Jack, surely you know your own brother? No comment. And so it went on for the remainder of the 7-minute interview. Michael Steele had little short of a lifetime's experience of interview rooms behind him. He knew his rights, and he knew the law only too well. And as Customs Officer Richard Hills was about to find out, with a villain of that calibre, unless you've got a cast iron case on the table in front of them, they'll never admit anything, and they'll make your life hell for even daring to try. Right, Mr. Steele, Hills began. You were arrested at Felixstowe Ferry this morning. What were you doing there? Let me explain something to you before you go any further. Yesterday morning, I think I was asked my name and address 6 times by different officers. Now, that one little bit of information has led me to being arrested and charged with a serious offence. I was brought to this police station, strip searched, put into a cell, no ventilation, no urinal, no drinking water, no bedding. Furthermore, I would like to explain to you at this moment right now that I've nothing whatsoever to say to you, for this simple reason. You've arrested me on what I'd call a trumped up charge, and anything I say now in answer to your questions will be no comment. No comment, no comment. And to save yourself and me any further time wasting, I'll explain to you now that I don't intend to answer any questions. I've done nothing wrong, and the reason I'm not answering any questions is because of the way I've been treated. Yes, but now therefore, I'm going to answer no more questions as of now, and for anybody who reads or listens to this tape later on, orally or in a transcript, I don't want to sound unreasonable by sitting here being quiet whilst you pop question after question to me. I tell you now, I'm not answering any of your questions. I've no intention of doing so. I've no need to answer your questions. I've done nothing wrong, and like I say, so far all I've done is give 6 people my name and address that's landed me up in here. Nothing further, nothing more to say to you as of now. And that was that. Steele refused to utter another word throughout the remainder of the 8-minute interview. Finally, it was the turn of Peter Corey, with Richard Hills doing the honours once again. At first it seemed like Corey might be the weak link with the loose tongue. He was offered a solicitor, but declined, wrongly assuming that the customs officer would believe he had nothing to hide if he didn't want one. But not having an opportunity to speak to the others and find out what stories they were giving out, he soon realised he was painting himself into a corner. "Okay," began Hills. "You was arrested this morning at Felixstowe Ferry in the early hours of the morning. What were you doing there?" "I was coming in on a boat." "What sort of boat was that?" "Diving boats. I don't know the names. I just went out in them." "Right. I take it that boat is not your property then?" "It's definitely not mine, no." "Whose is it?" "As far as I know, it's Mr. Steele's." "And what was the purpose of your trip in the boat?" "He put a lot of work into it, and he wanted to go out and test the computer on board, whatever it is. I think, and he said, 'Do you want to come out?' And I said, 'Yes.'" "I see. Did you launch the boat from Felixstowe Ferry?" "Where's Felixstowe Ferry?" "It's where you was arrested last night." "Oh, yes, yeah. After that, Corey's answers to Hill's questions became more and more vague, until he finally realised that he was making the situation far worse, and requested for a solicitor. 40 minutes later, Corey was in the hot seat with a new attitude and confident responses to the questions. "I've said all I'm going to say," he told Hills, bringing the proceedings to an unexpected premature end. Later that evening, the news came back from the Customs Forensic Lab that cannabis resin had been found on the deck of the boat, but it was no cause for celebration. The total weight was 266 milligrams. It wasn't enough to charge somebody with personal possession, let alone with smuggling. It wasn't even enough to roll a decent joint. The Range Rover had been examined and it was clean. Customs had no choice but to let the trio go. Craig Rolfe made his way from Essex to Golders Green to meet Black Gary, one of North London's top drug dealers. Having picked up his share of Steele's cannabis, Rolfe was anxious to turn it into hard cash as quickly as possible, and Gary was the man for the job. The deal was as straightforward as could be. The price per kilo worked out at an even £10,000 for the lot, with Rolfe's personal profit coming in at around £6,000. It would have been more, but Steele, insisting that the risks were greater since his brush with customs, pushed up the price for his importation service, something that had pissed off Tucker and particularly Tate no end. No money was changing hands between Rolfe and Black Gary that day. Instead, the cannabis was being laid on, and Gary would pass over the money as soon as he sold the drugs. It meant that Rolfe would have to wait a little longer to get paid, but the drugs were out of his hands in one fell swoop, and he didn't have to run the risk of being done for possession. All he had to do now was sit back and wait. Elsewhere in Essex, Darren Nichols was also waiting for the money to start rolling in. He had dozens of buyers waiting for the latest consignment of cannabis to arrive, and the 3 kilos he'd taken from Steele had all gone in a couple of hours. Pleased with himself for having done a good day's work, Nichols was preparing himself for a long, hard Saturday night down the pub when the first call came in. Darren Nichols was not alone. A furious Black Gary got on the phone to Craig Rolfe less than an hour after their meeting to tell him that he wouldn't be getting a penny as the cannabis was totally unsellable. Pat Tate, Tony Tucker and Peter Corey had also received complaints, and as with Nichols, the situation was getting out of hand. Nichols phoned Steele again and tried to break the bad news as gently as possible. He slowly explained the biggest drug shipment Steele had been involved in since getting back into smuggling, the one he'd almost been caught bringing into the country by customs, had been a complete waste of time. Steele went ballistic. Pat Tate was starting to feel the pinch. The business with the bad cannabis was really starting to hurt. Contacts that he'd spent years nurturing were now thinking twice about dealing with him. Just in case, they too ended up with a duff load. In his twisted, drug-aided mind, there was only one possible explanation for the whole mess. Michael Steele, the man he'd once considered a friend, and whom he'd trusted with his money, was trying to rip him off. Tate was also worried by the fact he'd passed on some of the duff puff to the Joneses brothers, the men who had lent him the money to get into the deal in the first place. They, not surprisingly, had been furious when the goods turned out to be unsellable, and they had sent some of their heavies round with orders to bring Tate before them so he could explain himself or face the consequences. As he stood before the impromptu kangaroo court, Tate explained that the bad cannabis had been entirely down to Michael Steele. In order to prove that he was telling the truth, he made the brothers a solemn promise. "I will bring Steele here, and I'll make him get down on his knees and beg forgiveness for trying to rip you off," Tate explained. "And then, when you've had enough, I'll put a gun to his head and blow his fucking brains out." The explanation was accepted, but it still left the small matter of the money that Tate owed. So far as the Joneses were concerned, a deal was a deal. They'd given him £40,000, and he'd promised him £50,000 back. Tate promised he would get the money just as soon as he could. The Joneses gave him 1 month. Even the most laid-back member of the firm was feeling distinctly uncomfortable. Normally, Tony Tucker was so distant from any actual drugs sold in the club that it wouldn't have been a problem, but Raquel's was different. The main dealer there, Mark Murray, had suffered a string of police raids on his employees, losing more than 250,000 pills, worth more than £40,000, in just a few weeks. It meant he hadn't been able to pay Tucker his usual rent, and he'd gone into the red. A compromise was reached. Tucker would supply Murray with his ecstasy direct, with Murray buying the pills at twice the usual rate in order to make up for the debt. Murray reluctantly agreed. He had long realised that it made good business sense to sell tablets that were weak as possible. They cost the same, but it meant the punters would buy 2 or 3 E's during the course of an evening, and his profits would be far higher. Tucker's pills were much stronger, so strong that one would let you rave all night long. It would take forever for Murray to repay his debt, but Tucker was determined to get his money back, so he had no choice. The problem Tucker was facing was that everybody knew his pills were the apples that Leah had taken, and that everybody was now talking about. And it was only a matter of time before the police found that out too. Tucker was certain that he was going to be betrayed. Everybody around him became a potential grass. Every knock on the door was a potential raid. Tucker, very much the brains behind the organisation, was starting to let it all get to him. The paranoia was highly infectious. By the time Darren Nichols arrived at Steele's house early on Monday evening, the master smuggler's mood had gone from bad to worse. As Steele and Nichols chatted, Steele's mobile phone rang. It was Dopey Harris, who proceeded to explain there had been a terrible accident, that the wrong boxes had been put in the car. Harris insisted, however, that at least one of the boxes, around a third of the total drug consignment, had been good stuff. Steele told him, in no uncertain terms, that unless things got sorted and quickly, he was going to pass on Harris's address to Tate, Tucker and Rolfe, who would come over and sort it out in person. Probably by smashing the fuck out of his bar, and then smashing the fuck out of him. Harris quickly agreed that if Steele returned all the drugs, he would get all his money back. Steele passed the message on, and over the next few hours the cannabis started to filter back. Most of his customers were a little annoyed, but willing to forgive and forget, especially with the promise of a full refund. Tate, however, was still in a fit of temper about the whole affair, and massively frustrated about the Leah Betts thing. He smashed each and every slab with a hammer before delivering it back to Steele. Wood also held back some of the drugs, telling Steele he'd only return them when he had his money in his hand. It didn't take Steele long to work out that Tate was holding back roughly a third of the whole shipment, the same amount that Stone had insisted was good. There could only be one conclusion. Tate was trying to rip him off. Early on Tuesday morning, DCI's story put his plan into action and raided Pat Tate's flat in Swanstead, where Tucker's mistress Donna Garwood was living. A small quantity of amphetamines was found, and Garwood spent a few hours in the cells before a fuming Tucker arrived to bail her out. There had been other raids across Basildon that morning too, most of them friends of Leah's or bagman some way down the drug supply chain. But for Tucker the message was clear, they were onto him. He had an emergency meeting with Tate and Rolfe about what they were going to do. Then the firm had its first lucky break. Steve Packman and Stephen Smith had been arrested and charged with supplying the tablets. The police had their result and the public had their scapegoat. All the firm had to do was wait for Steele to sort out the cannabis deal, and everything would be sweet as a nut once more. After Steele had sorted out the cannabis deal in Amsterdam, the members of the London firm were preparing to go to Ostend to collect their money. Tony Tucker had decided to drop out at the last minute. It was the day before his birthday, and as a treat his living lover Anna had arranged a surprise night at a London hotel. Tucker had no interest in cancelling it. Besides, it wasn't as if the job wasn't so difficult that Rolfe and Tate couldn't handle it on their own. The firm needed as many people as possible to help bring back the cash. That way, each person would be carrying a reasonably small amount, so that if they were stopped by customs, they wouldn't look too suspicious. Rolfe had asked his girlfriend Donna Jaggers, but she didn't like the sound of it and turned him down. It wasn't so much the trip to collect the money that she objected to. It was another bigger job that Rolfe had started to mention that was simply getting much too serious for her liking. Craig had told me that Steele had approached Tate and asked him to nick someone else's gear from them. Steele had been asked by a London gang to import 30 kilos of cocaine and was going to fly it over from Holland. It told Pat Tate he had been given £50,000 up front and bring the cocaine back with a member of the London gang in the passenger seat. The idea was that Tate and Tucker would rob the firm of the cocaine once it arrived over here. Tate suggested they share it between them and had told the firm he planned to land it in a field near Clacton. In fact, Steele was actually going to land in a South Essex field where Tate and the others would be waiting. A week or so earlier, Craig, Tony and Pat had obtained a machine gun from a man called Mad Mick. It had been handed over at a meeting at the Granada Motorway Services in Essex for £300. They were planning to use the gun on the man from the London firm in order to take the cocaine. I didn't know how far they were planning to go when they robbed the firm, but they knew they had to make sure the gun worked. Rolfe and Tucker had already used the gun to spray bullets into the car of a man threatening to give evidence against Tucker in a forthcoming assault case. I'd put some extra ventilation holes in the door and windows. They knocked on the man's door. Next time, you'll be inside it, they said, then left. By now, Jaggers was getting increasingly nervous herself and terrified that her and Rolfe were going to be arrested at any time. She hoped that if she refused to go to Amsterdam, that Rolfe might pull out. Instead, she found her boyfriend was really excited at the prospect of a night on the tiles in a foreign country with no one to tie him down, and he looked forward to going even more. Rolfe took his Range Rover and picked up Tucker's other girlfriend Donna Garwood, Tate's girlfriend Lizzie Fletcher, and her friend Gaynor. To make up the numbers, Tate also asked his car dealer friend Barry Dorman to come along, and he agreed to follow in a separate car, bringing his girlfriend Annette to keep him company. The Range Rover was the first car in the convoy to arrive in Ostend. Tate left the others in a pub when he went to the entrance of the train station where they agreed to meet Steele. Garwood and the others watched from the distance as Tate and Steele returned to the pub and made their way to a quiet table in the corner where they talked about 20 minutes. When Steele got up to go, he passed over the bulging carrier bag he'd been holding to Tate. The transaction was complete. In the meantime, Darren Nichols was standing across the road from the pub, trying to shelter from the rain and waiting for Steele to reappear. When the pair had arrived in Ostend, Steele had booked into a hotel and sent Nichols off to the ferry terminal to buy a ticket. The idea was that he would take £20,000 back with him on the overnight ferry, and that Steele would travel back to England the following morning, once she had dished the rest of the money out to the others. As always, Steele had told Nichols to make himself scarce. He didn't want anyone to know who was on his team, just in case they tried to poach them, or use his drug contacts. After 20 minutes of getting wet and watching the gang laughing and joking in the warm dry pub, Steele eventually came out and Nichols called him over. On the 4th of December, Pat Tate was planning a quiet night in with Lizzie Fletcher. She called up the London Pizza Company in Basildon and asked the 21-year-old manager, Roger Ryle, for a pizza with different toppings on each quarter. Ryle told her that would not be possible. Suddenly, Tate grabbed the phone. "You all deliver the pizza I fucking want, or I'll come round here and get it." "I wasn't going to take that," Ryle said later. "So I said to him, get rid of the attitude and I will send you a pizza." "What's your fucking name?" screamed Tate. That made him worse, and he slammed the phone down. Half an hour later, Tate turned up. "Who's Roger?" When Ryle put his hands up, Tate picked up the till and threw it at him. Ryle quickly backed out of the office and pushed the panic button as Tate vaulted the counter and rushed towards him. Punched me in the face and smashed my head up and down on the glass plate on the draining board. Blood steamed out of a wound in his head. Tate warned him not to call the police or he would return and smash the place up and beat up all the staff. But it was too late. The panic button brought officers and Tate was traced to his home in Basildon. At first, Ryle, who had concussion, was determined to have the man who had assaulted him brought to justice. But as friends and colleagues told him more about Pat Tate's reputation and that of the firm that he belonged to, Ryle's resolve softened. By the following morning, he'd withdrawn his statement and decided not to press charges. Within the space of a few hours, the incident had become legend across southeast Essex. For some, it was testimony to Pat's increasing arrogance and influence that he could commit such a public crime and get away with it. There was a time when his strength, his wit and charm made him a valuable asset. But that was in the past. Now there was only one way to describe Pat Tate: a liability. In a quiet corner of TGI Fridays at the Lakeside Shopping Centre, Tate, Tucker and Rolfe were deep in discussion. The initial plan could not have been more straightforward. They had agreed with Steele that they would be hiding in some bushes when the plane landed, leap out, fire a few shots in the air to scare the pilot, and take away the 30 kilos of pure, unadulterated Charlie. To make it look good and ensure that no one suspected it was an inside job, they'd have to threaten Steele as well, maybe even tie him up for a while, but it would all be play acting. The firm would leave with all the drugs and meet up with Steele a couple of days later to divide it all up. But now, the plan had changed. As far as Tate was concerned, he explained to the others, Michael Steele was guilty of having tried to rip the firm off with the dodgy cannabis. Okay, so they eventually paid the money back, but it still caused them a huge amount of grief, and now it was payback time. Rather than handing over 10 kilos of pure cocaine, they would give Steele just 3 kilos of the good stuff, mixed with a load of impurities such as caffeine or chalk dust to make it up to the full weight. That would leave the firm with 27 kilos of premium quality Bolivian marching powder between them. Tate had already discussed the price with a certain John McCarthy, a man well used to dealing in large amounts of the white stuff, and the quote that came back was one of those magical numbers that whether you're a pop star, a merchant banker, or just a gangster, announces to the world you have definitely arrived. McCarthy was going to pay the firm a cool $1 million. Steele had apparently already been paid his fee for flying the plane, and the drugs were packed up and standing by to be collected in Holland. The only delay to the deal was the snow on the ground, which Steele explained made landing in such a small place too hazardous, even for a pilot as skilled as he was. But the firm regarded their money as good as theirs. To celebrate, they booked a table for the same evening at the Global Net Cafe in Romford, where along with their girlfriends, they would toast their soon-to-be stinking rich status. Donna Jaggers was also finishing work for the day when Craig Rolfe called her. It was around 3 p.m. and I was just about to leave when he phoned to say Mickey the pilot had been in touch earlier in the day and wanted to meet Tucker and Tate that evening to show them where he was going to land the plane. Craig was really excited that the deal was getting so imminent. He wanted me to wear something new at the meal that evening, so he said he'd take me to the Lakeside shopping centre, go off to the airstrip and then come back and pick me up. I met him at home about an hour or so later, and he told me for the first time about the change in the plans and how they were going to rip Mickey off. As Craig explained what was going on, I was getting more and more worried, and told him I didn't want him to have any part of it. He told me that they were only going to look at a field, and that Mickey didn't know he was going to be driving, and that he wasn't nearly as heavily involved in what was going on as the other two were. But mostly, he told me about the money. He said that for once he would have enough money to enable us to go ahead with whatever plans we wanted. We would be able to live anywhere and do nothing all day, visit anywhere in the world. It would be the life we always dreamed of. I realised that there was no way I was going to be able to talk him out of it. Even though I didn't want him to go through with it, it was obvious he was just in too deep. As Rolfe dropped off at the shopping centre, Jaggers tried one last time to talk him out of going to the rendezvous, but his mind was made up. He said to me, "If I don't go, then Tony can turn around later when the drugs come in and say I didn't have anything to do with the arrangements, so my cut would be smaller. I don't want that to happen. I've got to do my bit. I've got to play my part." And then he left. Sitting alone at home, Sarah Saunders was starting to feel a little sorry for herself. Earlier that day she'd phoned Pat Tate, hoping to have a civilised discussion about how much maintenance he planned to pay her. She might as well have hoped for world peace. Tate had almost been impossible to talk to. He was in a really excited, hyped up state and had obviously been taking drugs. There was no point in trying to reason with him like that. It had ended up in a furious row and he'd slammed the phone down. But despite everything that had happened, Saunders still cared deeply for Tate and was anxious that her son would have a proper relationship with his father. She glanced at her watch. It had been more than 5 hours since they had last spoken. With any luck, he might have calmed down. She took one deep breath and reached for the phone. It may have been close to freezing outside, but the atmosphere inside the Range Rover was warm and jolly. Tate, Tucker and Rolfe were preoccupied with the vast amount of money they would soon be collecting, and the pre-celebration meal that had been planned for later that evening. They were firing questions at Steele, who was sitting in the back beside Tate, asking exactly when he'd be leaving for Holland and when he'd be landing. In between giving directions to Craig Rolfe, Steele reassured the gang that they were at most a couple of days away from their nice little earner. Just as the Range Rover turned into Workhouse Lane, Tate's mobile came to life. "Hello? Oh, hello, darling. Really? Oh, you sweetheart. Well, maybe I can come by tomorrow. Listen, I can't talk now. I'm with some people. We'll talk later. Okay. I miss you too. Bye." Steele bit his lip and tried to stop his anger mounting. Upon that point, everything that Sarah Saunders had told him indicated that she and Tate could hardly stand one another. Yet here they were having this loving, caring conversation. But Steele didn't have time to dwell on it for long. A split second later, the Range Rover reached the bottom of the lane. "Hey, there's a gate down here," said Rolf. "What do you want to do?" Steele had to think quickly. When he and Jack had checked the lane out before, the gate had been open. Had Jack shut it for some reason? Perhaps there was some other people in the field. Perhaps Jack wasn't there at all. The only thing to do was play it by ear. "I'll get it," he said. "You lot stay in the warm." Craig Rolfe was the first to die. As soon as the rear passenger door had opened and Steele was clear, Jack Williams had leaned in with a pump action. He pressed the barrel against the back of the driver's headrest and pulled the trigger. The pellets ripped through the fabric and straight through Rolfe's skull, leaving a gaping hole right between his eyes. Both his hands were still on the steering wheel. His foot was on the brake. He looked like he'd just pulled up at some traffic lights. Tony Tucker was next. With the blast ringing in his ears for just a second before, he had no time to react. Williams moved the gun and shot him in the back of the head. He died with his legs crossed and his mobile phone sitting in his lap. Tate, sitting in the back seat, was the only one who would have known he was about to die. By the time Williams trained the gun on him, less than 2 seconds after firing the first shot, Tate was wailing and pushing himself back into the corner of the car, making a futile escape. Williams paused for a second as Tate began begging for his life, wailing and whining. This time, Steele fired first, both barrels ripping through Tate's belly. "Wait, stop, what are you doing? No!" Tate's voice was getting higher and higher as his pleas got more desperate. Then Steele appeared beside Williams holding a gun, and Tate knew it was all over. He raised his hands to protect himself with such furiosity that his knuckles smashed through the rear window and he screamed for his life. At the same instant, one shot tore off the left side of his face, while another split open his chest, ripping his liver apart. There was no doubt that the three were dead, but this was more than an execution. Williams pumped his shotgun and opened the front door of the car. He put the barrel up against what was left as Tucker's head and fired again. The pressure inside Tucker's skull was more than it could bear. His head literally exploded as the bones broke through the skin. Then Williams went round to Rolfe and did the same. This time, the shots were fired from such close range that they singed the fur collar on his anorak and pushed his jawbone across to where his ear would normally be. In the meantime, Steele was getting excited and reached out to Williams. "Give me more cartridges, give me more cartridges." He reloaded and fired again, only to have his gun fall apart. Both men burst out laughing, and Steele scrambled around on the floor in the pitch black looking for his barrel. Darren Nichols had driven down the road, past several tempting pubs, and parked on the side of the road to wait for Jack to call him. Had the frost not been quite so severe that morning, so severe as to render it impossible to mix mortar, then Ken Jiggins would have simply have gone to work. As it was, the amiable bricklayer decided to start the day helping his friend, Peter Fearbold, feed the 800 pheasants he kept at Whitehouse Farm in Retterdon. Jiggins arrived just after 8 a.m, and eager to get the job done, the pair decided to skip tea and headed straight for Fearbold's Land Rover. It had snowed during the night. There was a thick layer of ice on the car's windscreen and windows, which the two men diligently scraped off before driving across the field and then turning left into Workhouse Lane. As they neared the bottom, they found their path blocked by a metallic blue Range Rover, parked in front of the locked gate that leads to the fishing pond. Inside, Jiggins and Fearbold could clearly see the silhouettes of two men slumped in the front seats. Their first thought was that they might be asleep, so Jiggins jumped out to ask them to move out of the way. I tapped on the driver's window, looked in and saw the driver lying with his head on one side. There was blood coming from his nose, his mouth and on his chest, says Jiggins. The passenger sat with his head slumped forward and blood on his chest. Fearbold was still in his car, worrying that the men might be poachers, and turned nasty when Jiggins called out to him. "There's 2 dead men here!" As the pair nervously dialed for the police on Fearbold's mobile phone, they noticed a third man in the back, with more blood and gore spilling out from his head, and from a gaping wound in his belly. Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley had been with Essex Police for 31 years, since the tender age of 17. He was just 4 months away from retirement and getting ready to enjoy a rare day off when just after 8:30 a.m, The call came asking him if he'd like to come in and take charge of what would undoubtedly be the biggest case of his entire career. Although he was officially on leave that day, the killing had occurred on his designated patch, so through polite protocol, a colleague phoned to offer him the first bite of the cherry. Dibley had a first-class record when it came to murder. Of the 25 homicides he'd investigated, only 2 had remained unsolved. He also took any gangland murder on his patch as a personal challenge, as if somebody was throwing down a gauntlet saying, "I bet you can't catch me." I said yes, but on one condition. I'd promised my daughter that I'd change an electrical fitting at her house. And I wanted to do that first. The only information I had was that there was 3 dead men in a Range Rover, so I knew a pathologist would have to be called to the scene, and that the inquiry wasn't going to take any real steps for several hours at least. His chores done, Dibley made his way to the scene of the crime, and was immediately disturbed by what he saw around him. The first thing you do when you're investigating a murder scene is look around for things that may help you. As I was walking down the lane, I looked around, and there was nothing. Absolutely nothing. No houses overlooking the scene, not even any houses close enough to consider house-to-house inquiries. There was a slight covering of snow on the ground, but this was melted away before my very eyes and taking any footprint evidence with it. The further I got down the lane, the more isolated I realised it was. There was no chance of a live witness having seen anything, or even heard anything. My first thought was, Christ, where do we start? At that stage, Dibley didn't even know who the men were. Despite the dinner arrangements that had been put in place the previous evening, the girlfriends of Tate, Tucker and Rolfe saw no cause for alarm. They were well used to their men vanishing at short notice, sometimes for days at a time. Besides, phoning the police to report them missing so quickly would have done nothing to ingratiate themselves had they turned up later on. The car gave no clues either. The man in whose name the vehicle was registered was found to be alive and well. However, the police records did show that a local officer had run a check on the same vehicle the previous day. When he was tracked down, he explained that he'd seen the vehicle being driven by a well-known face and had pulled him over to check whose vehicle it was. The face was Craig Rolfe, and Dibley had his first name. But it was only when local news bulletins about 3 men being executed in a Range Rover started airing around the middle of the day that Donajaggers and the other relatives sensed that something might be wrong and reached for the phone. About the same time, Tony Tucker's mobile phone began to ring. "We've just heard that there are 3 men who have been found dead in a Range Rover," said the voice of a worried friend. "We think one of them is you." As the names slowly started to filter in, so the manner of the execution began to make more sense, especially when it came to one of the dead men in particular. "I'd actually met Tate before," says Dibley. "I was working as a DI in Brentwood at the time. There had been a number of armed robberies that Tate was rumoured to be involved in. Before we could do anything, he'd escaped from the magistrate's court, ran off to Spain, been brought back and was banged up on some other charges. But I was still keen to try to clear these crimes up, so I went on a cold visit to Swellside Prison to see if I could persuade him to admit to some of the unsolved crimes. So I'm waiting in this interview room and the prison officers have gone to call him over. As it's a cold visit, he has no idea who I am or why I'm here. And I'm looking at this 6-foot 6-inch doorway, waiting for him to turn up. And when he does, he fills the doorway completely. I've never seen such a big man in the whole of my life. He actually took all the light away from the room. That's how big he was. His arms, chest, everything was just enormous. He sat down and I said, "Hello, Mr. Tate. You don't know me, but I'm investigating some armed robberies." And for the next 20 minutes, I talked and talked and talked. I was going on about what I suspected he had done, and saying that the only way he'd get parole for his current sentence would be if he come clean about everything. The whole time, he just sat there and stared at me. He didn't say a word. Then after about 20 minutes, he just got up and walked out the room. The next time I saw him, he was dead. By the end of the first day, the identities of all 3 men had been firmly established, and the grim task of informing the next of kin was well underway. For some, the news was simply too much to bear. Tony Tucker's 63-year-old father, Ronald, was at home in Folkestone, Kent, when he found out. Ronald had half seen the news bulletins about the brutal killing, but had never believed even for a second that his precious son could have been involved. Within seconds of finding out, he had a massive heart attack and dropped dead on the spot. The following morning, local and national newspapers started running stories about the backgrounds of the 3 dead men and speculating about what was going on. The Essex Police press office was besieged with calls from hacks He wanted to know if this was going to be the start of a massive gangland war in the county, if the dead men had been armed, how many shots had been fired, and most of all, if anyone had been arrested. The police were saying nothing, but there was so much background to write about, they didn't need to. There was the link to Leah Betts, the attack on the pizza parlour man, the previous attempt on Tate's life, and even a celebrity angle, thanks to Tucker's friendship with Nigel Benn. That afternoon, Dibley held a press conference where he answered a few questions, then produced Donna Jaggers to make a direct, emotional appeal to attempt to humanise the three men who were already being typecast as mindless thugs. Weeping uncontrollably, Jaggers proved that at least somebody cared about them.
It's like anyone who was with them maybe in the afternoon, who knows anything about what's happened to them, or if they see anything, to just come forward. We need all the help we can get.
Dibley couldn't have put it better himself. Earlier in the day, he'd received a report from his forensics team. Dozens of fingerprints had been lifted from the interior of the Range Rover, but it all turned out to belong to Tate, Tucker or Rolfe. A few fibres had been recovered, but with no control samples for comparison, they were worthless. There was a few unexplained footprints scattered around the scene, but as the lane was regularly used by local anglers, it didn't seem worth getting excited about. For a while, everybody thought the best lead would come from the 7 spent cartridges found on the ground by the car, but even that had come to nothing. Not only were the cases clean of fingerprints, but they also turned out to be the most common brand of cartridge available. The chances of finding out where they were brought and therefore who had brought them was nil. As far as background information or details about the recent activities of the dead men were concerned, none of Tate or Tucker's relatives were willing to even have an informal chat. Then Dibley got his first break. It took a while for it to dawn on Donna Jaggers that she might hold a clue to tracking down Rolfe's killers. Her first instinct had been to protect herself and their child, to ensure she said as little as possible for fear of implicating herself. She had after all been there when Kevin Whitaker was killed. She'd been present at many of Rolfe's drug deals, and she'd witnessed firsthand the increasing tension between members of the gang in the weeks leading up to the killings. Most of all, she knew that Rolfe and the others had been on their way to meet the man she knew only as Mickey the Pilot on the night they died. Soon after the press conference, she made a new statement explaining everything she knew. It was less than 36 hours after the murder, and Dibley now had the name of his prime suspect. All he had to do now was find out who Mickey the Pilot actually was. I didn't know who or what I was dealing with, so I wanted to keep things pretty close to my chest. I was in the canteen at the police headquarters when I saw a friend who worked in the criminal intelligence. "You don't happen to know a pilot called Mickey?" I asked him. He said that he did. "Alright, listen, at some stage you think you could let me have whatever you've got on him?" He said he was just on his way to the office and that he'd get it for him then and there. This was just what I wanted. I didn't even have to wait a week or even a weekend, but I had to make it look as casual as possible. As soon as Dibley saw the details of Steele's previous convictions, a possible motive for the killings, a drugs-related double-cross, became clear. But for the theory to work, there had to be some firm connection between Steele and the dead men. Did they live near each other? Did they ever work together? Did they socialise together? Did their girlfriends know each other? It was like working on a 1,000-piece jigsaw when you only have 50 pieces. Even if the stuff you have is all in the right place, it's still not making a picture at all. It's easy looking back with hindsight. You just think, well, they're all in prison together, it's obvious. But at the time, that's just one of dozens of possibilities. Everything you do in these early stages is pure guesswork. Even having an idea at where to look is no guarantee of success. Checking whether prisoners have served time together is no easy task, even for the police. Chelmsford Prison, for example, has 40 movements per day. Records are not always kept, and even if you find 2 prisoners in the same jail at the same time, you still need confirmation from staff or other prisoners before you can say for sure that they actually knew each other, particularly if they were serving on different wings. With neither Tucker or Rolfe having served much time, the connections with Steele had to be through Tate. And once it was established that the pair had been banged up together at Swellside Prison through most of 1992, another clue was on the table. If Steele knew Tate best, then it might have been Tate's behaviour that led to his death. Bill Davidson knew Michael Steele of old. A long-serving member of the National Investigation Service of Customs and Excise, He'd been one of the leading lights between Operation Waterski, the largest customs investigation that had resulted in Steele being sent to prison in 1989. After hearing of his release on parole in 1994, Davidson knew it was only a matter of time before Steele tried to get back into the game. It was nothing more than a hunch based on Steele's love of smuggling for the adrenaline kick as much as for the money. So there was nothing to justify a surveillance operation there and then. But Davidson carefully ensured that any odd bits of information that related to Steele, his activities, his associates, were compiled and coordinated on a regular basis. Davidson's hunch was proved right when Steele was arrested along with Womes and Corey at Felixstowe Ferry in November 1995. Although there hadn't been enough evidence to press charges, it was blindingly obvious what the trio had been up to. A boatload of cannabis had brought over from Belgium, landed somewhere on the Essex or Suffolk coast, and then Steele had gone back out to sea and brought his boat back in at the marina. When the boat was finally returned to Jack Womes, it was after all he who said he owned it. Davidson learned it was being stored at a garage at G&T Commercials, the dockside haulage company in Ipswich where Womes worked as a freelance mechanic, looking after the company's vehicles. The boat was clearly the key to Steele's smuggling activities, so Davidson decided to assign a team to keep the premises under watch and issue an alert to ports and airports to look out for any new trips abroad. The first few weeks yielded little interest as far as the boat was concerned. Though a report from Harwich said that Steele had made a ferry trip to the Hook of Holland along with Darren Nichols around the 15th of November. A few days after the Retterdam murders, Davidson was preparing to submit the plans to his superiors, asking for the operation to be stepped up when a call came in from the Essex police, explaining that Michael Steele was the #1 suspect in the triple killings. An urgent meeting was arranged, and it was quickly agreed that the police investigation should take priority, and that they would put Steele and some of his associates under round-the-clock surveillance. If the police came across anything that indicated the target was planning another smuggling trip, Customs would immediately be brought in. By the same token, Customs agreed to pass on all their information about Steele and his associates and keep the police informed of any movements through ports and airports. Less than 2 weeks after Steele had committed what he considered to be a near-perfect murder, the net was starting to close in. For a man accused of a gruesome triple murder and said to be involved in drug smuggling on a massive scale, Michael Steele seemed to be living a life that would bore a hermit. Dibley's men watched him go into the shops, pottering around in the grounds of his home, going out for the odd meal with Jackie Street, visiting his ex-girlfriend or sister-in-law, visiting Sarah Saunders, and then pottering around once again. Yet despite finding nothing out of the ordinary, Dibley found himself under enormous pressure to arrest Steele there and then. A lot of people in my team were saying that the gun that had been used for the murders would be in a case above the mantelpiece in his house. They reckoned it would be a real trophy, and they'd definitely hang on to it. All we had to do was raid him, and the case would be solved. I didn't agree. From what I knew of Steele, he was much too clever to have anything like that lying around. The clothes, the shoes, the guns, anything that could link into a murder would have been destroyed almost immediately. If we'd have picked him up, he would have sat on his hands and said, "I don't know what you're talking about." No comment all the way. It was too risky to even contemplate. The only possible advantage we had was that Steele had no idea we were onto him. An arrest would spoil all that. My bosses would have loved to have brought him in. The press would have loved it. The families of the dead men would have loved it. But the time just wasn't right. Instead, Dibley decided to let the job run long term, doing nothing more proactive than watching, waiting, and building up a picture of Steele's gang. Womes and Corey had already been identified as key members of Steele's smuggling team by Customs, but that didn't mean they were involved in the murder. Dibley, however, was convinced that Steele had not acted alone. The way I saw it, Steele couldn't have been on his own, because there was no way he would have risked getting into the Range Rover with a gun. Even if it was a sawn-off, then it would have still been bulging out under his raincoat or trouser leg. It would have been really obvious. And even if he did find a way of concealing it, he'd have never been able to get it out quickly enough to take out all three men by surprise. There had to be at least 2 killers, Steele in the car itself, and another man hiding in the bushes down the lane with 2 guns. That way, as Steele got out of the car, the other man could hand him a gun and then lean in and start shooting. I also felt there had to be at least one more person involved because of the question of transportation to and from the murder scene. Steele was easy. It arrived in the Range Rover, but what about the other man? He would have been hiding down the lane for a while, at least half an hour. Would he risk parking his own car somewhere nearby, or down the lane itself? Unlikely. It was only a small risk, but if a member of the public, or worse still a policeman saw it, thought it was suspicious, and made a note of the number, then it would all be over. There's also the question of your state of mind after you've done something like that. No matter how cold and unemotional you are, you wouldn't want to do anything to draw attention to yourself as you're driving away from the murder scene. The only possible solution was to have a third member of the gang parked up somewhere and have them pick Steele and the other killer up once the deed was done. Dibley took his theory one step further. He predicted that when an arrest was eventually made, it would be the getaway driver who would prove to be the weak link. Whether he knew the killings were about to take place or not, he would have taken no actual part in it. He would have had to be away from the scene, and would therefore do everything he could to distance himself from the actual crime. If anybody was going to talk, it would be him. It was less than 10 days after the murder, and Dibley, in an astonishing bit of classic detective work, had managed to work out exactly what had happened, and pretty much who was responsible. And he didn't have a single scrap of evidence to prove it. Just before Christmas, a member of Dibley's team pulled him to one side and asked him how much he knew about the way mobile phones work. Dibley admitted he didn't know that much and asked why. The man explained that whenever a mobile phone is switched on, it automatically sends a signal to the nearest radio beacon, so that the network knows where the phone is. The information is instantly transferred to a central computer. When a call comes in from that particular phone, it is sent out via the same beacon. If a phone moves out of a particular area, it continues sending out signals until it is picked up from the next nearest beacon. The man could see his boss's eyes were starting to glaze over, so he quickly got to the point. If Steele and his accomplices had had their mobile phones with them on the day of the murder, then they would have logged on to the beacon nearest to Workhouse Lane at some point that evening. They'd be able to see what time Steele got there, what time he left, and who he was with. They'd be able to check his movements earlier in the day, as well as see who he was in contact with, and compare them to the movements of Tate, Tucker and Rolfe. It sounded brilliant, almost too good to be true. I asked him what he'd need to compile the information, and he scratched his chin for a second, then said just a couple of computer terminals and a corner of the incident room. I told him to go for it and keep me informed on a daily basis. It took a few weeks to track down all the different sources of information and work out the best way of putting it all together, but when the first printouts emerged, they were beyond Dibley's wildest expectations. You couldn't see the people, and you couldn't hear what was being said, but you could follow everyone's movements, or to be more exact, the movements of their phones, throughout the day, and see all the different sides slowly coming together, and ended up at Workhouse Lane. It was incredible. It all started around 2 PM with a call from Steele's landline to Nichols's mobile, which was at the time out in Sunbury on the site close to Heathrow. 11 minutes later, Steele called Wombs at G&T in Ipswich. Soon after that, there were calls from a payphone at the Sorrel House Inn, a pub just down the road from G&T, to Tucker's mobile, and then Tate's mobile, as Wombs started arranging the meeting for that evening. The call to Tate's mobile was brief and followed a few minutes later by a much longer call to a payphone close to Tate's house, an attempt to get around any bugging devices that may have been planted. After that, there was a series of calls between Steele and Nichols, with the latter getting even closer to Essex, until both his phone and Steele's connected with the beacon nearest to Marks Tay. At 6:44 PM, Tate's mobile received a call from the landline belonging to Sarah Saunders. At 1 minute to 7, Woms's mobile connected to the beacon nearest Workhouse Lane for a 3-second call to the mobile of Darren Nichols, as he asked to be picked up from the murder scene. Although no calls had been made or received by Steele's phone during the time the murders were believed to have taken place, the printout showed that it too had logged itself onto the beacon nearest Workhouse Lane around the critical time. The phone records not only fingered Steele and Wombs as the killers and Nichols as the getaway driver, but also put Corey in the clear. When he sat down and looked at it all, it seemed to be pretty damning evidence, but as far as I was concerned, it didn't change a thing, says Dibley. The pressure to arrest Steele was on again, and all he would have said was that he didn't have his phone with him that day. His wife borrowed it, and he went out on a drive around Essex. It wasn't enough to prove anything different, so all we could do was add it to the pot and continue with the long-term plan. It was another piece of the jigsaw, but the picture was still far from complete. In fact, short of getting Steele to throw his hands up and shout out, "I did it, it was me all along," There didn't seem to be any way to close the case, but we had to keep going. The alternative is you pack up your bags and say we think he's done it, but we can't prove it, so let's just leave it. And that would have suited a lot of people. All the time I was being asked, what are you worried about? Why are you wasting your time on this scum? Whoever done this has done the whole population a favour. It was on the evening of Thursday the 15th of February 1996, shortly after the 9 PM news had come on the air, that a relaxed and confident Michael Still received the first telephone call. The voice was not one that he recognised, but Still listened patiently as the softly spoken Irishman on the other end of the line explained that he'd been trying to track him down for several weeks, along with his brother John. The caller Billy had been part of an organisation working closely with Pat Tate. Unbeknown to Still, all the merchandise that had been shipping into the country and passing on to Tate had eventually made its way to the Emerald Isle. When the enterprise started up, Billy and John had been led to believe that the fresh supplies would be reaching them on a regular basis, and with that in mind, they'd invested a good deal of their own money into the venture to ensure its smooth operation. But now with Tate dead, the brothers had suddenly found themselves out of pocket and out of stock. Everybody had assumed that Tate was working with the Joneses. Perhaps Billy and John were linked to them. The initial request was simple enough. Would Still be willing to supply the same goods at the same bargain price Tate had offered to them directly? If that wasn't possible, then how about delivering the goods at a reduced rate to a local third party whom they would nominate? Or if Still himself had a suggestion for the best way to do business, they would be more than happy to listen. Up until that point, Still had said nothing more than hello. He'd held his silence for a moment longer, but when he finally chose to speak again, he chose his words carefully. I haven't got the faintest idea what you're talking about, mate, he said, and promptly put the phone down. The second call came 2 days later, and the first threat followed almost immediately. Pat owed us £40,000, said Billy, the voice having suddenly developed a much harder edge. We want our fucking money. Where is it? This isn't some game. Even under pressure, Still remained the epitome of cool. I think the police have got it. Why don't you talk to them, he said, and promptly put the phone down. After that, it all started to fall apart. Don't fuck with us, Mickey, hissed John the following evening. We want our money, or you'll be sorted out just like Pat was. Still had to stifle a giggle. The idea of someone threatening him with the same fate as Pat, under the circumstances, so ludicrous it almost brought tears to his eyes. Over the next week or so, the calls became more and more frequent, and Billy and John made more and more references to the end of the IRA ceasefire and the bombing of Canary Wharf. The implication was obvious, but Still wasn't going to be pushed around by anyone. The threats became even more direct. You're going to have to emigrate, Billy told him one day. That's the only way. I'm going to have to follow these matters up. And watch your car. I have A-levels in whacking people. Still's response was curt and to the point. I've told you, I don't know what you're talking about. Why don't the pair of you just fuck off and bother someone else? Billy just laughed. You better watch your back. The ceasefire's gone, Mickey. And your ceasefire's gone. A few days later, a tearful Sarah Saunders called Still. Billy and John had taken him at his word and called her up to make similar threats. Saunders, unaware at first that Still had also been contacted by the brothers, had gone straight to the Basildon police with the phone number they'd given her. Their response did little to comfort her. Not only had the number been traced to a well-known Republican bar in Belfast, but Billy and John, both identified as known members of a major terrorist cell, had recently travelled to the mainland. They'd been tracked entering the port, but the special agents tailing them had now lost track. No one knew where they were. Saunders was terrified, but Still was full of doubts. Would terrorists really hold him responsible for the £40,000? Could they have been dealing with someone as unreliable and as unpredictable as Tate? Would they really be phoning him up and threatening him so openly on the phone? None of it made sense. He took a gamble and did nothing. And almost as soon as they had started, the phone call stopped. It's bollocks, he told Darry Nichols. I reckon it's probably the old Bill or someone. At first, Sandra Nichols put it down to a series of coincidences. Then after a week or so, she thought she might be going mad. And after that, just for a little while, she was convinced that Darren suspected she was being unfaithful and was having her checked out. It was only after she'd exhausted a host of other possibilities that she reluctantly faced the truth, that the periodically familiar faces, the oddly parked cars with silent occupants, and the men and women talking into the buttons on their collars that she saw on every street corner could mean only one thing. she was being followed by the police. Our relationship was going through an all-time low. Dan was trying his level best to try to keep the fact he was selling cannabis quiet, but his level best was pretty useless. The thing is, he was selling most of it to people that I knew, so it didn't stay quiet for long. When he had gone away over the counterfeit money, I came so close to breaking down. I hated every minute of it. I really didn't think I'd be able to handle it again, and I wanted out. To this day, I don't think Darren knows how close I came to leaving him. I really didn't want him to be arrested, but at the same time, I just knew it would come as a huge relief, because at least then he wouldn't be able to do it anymore. I was saying to him, look, we're being watched. I know you're going to be arrested. I know it's going to happen. You're going to go away. He would just tell me to not be silly, that I was just imagining things. I was begging him to stop. Look, Darren, you're working. You're earning more than enough money to have a pretty good life. You just don't need to do it anymore. But he just didn't want to listen. Mick seemed to have some sort of incredible power over him. Whenever he phoned, Darren would jump. He would be there, dash off to be by his side, no matter what. If he was in the middle of something else, it didn't matter how important it was. He'd drop it to go and see Mick. He'd cancel absolutely anything. If we'd have managed to arrange a babysitter and I'd have convinced him to take me out for the night, he'd think nothing of cancelling the whole thing if Mick just called up. And I got really sick of the fact that he'd always promised me that he wasn't doing anything illegal when he was blatantly obvious that he was. In fact, because he was so hopeless at keeping all of his criminal activity from me, I was stunned that he'd never let anything slip about the murder. But he hadn't, not at all. At that time, I had no idea he'd been involved at any level. It was on the news and in the papers all the time. But we only ever talked about it once. It was a couple of days afterwards when the police first announced the names of the dead men. We were watching TV when Pat Tate's picture came up on the screen, and I said, hey look, there's the bloke you was in prison with. At first, Darren didn't say anything, he just nodded. And then he said something which has always stuck in my mind. He said that Mick wouldn't be going to the funeral. Then, after that, he never mentioned it again. Steele and Worms had no idea they were being watched, but years of smuggling experience meant that whenever he was on a job, Steele would ensure that everyone practiced basic anti-surveillance techniques. Every roundabout had to be driven around at least twice, and every now and then you should pull over and wait for 20 cars to go past you. So far as the police and customs teams were concerned, Steele's antics were a bit of a pain in the arse, but caused them no real problems. They had now established that the boat had been launched and was on its way to Blankenberg. All they had to do was wait for him to return, and they'd be able to catch Steele red-handed. The only fly in the ointment was that although customs knew the exact methods that Steele used to get the drugs into the country, they had no idea where he actually landed them before heading back out to sea and working on his fishing trip cover story. The speed at which events were now moving had taken the police team by surprise. By the time they called customs in, it was too late for any air support to be brought in to follow the boat. Instead, all that Bill Davidson and his team could do was stake out a few likely landing points. But at 11 PM, a report came in that the boat was being landed at Brightlingsea Harbour. There were 2 people on board who looked as if they had been fishing. Whenever the drugs landing had been, the team had missed it. There was a lot of pressure to arrest Steele anyway, said Davidson. But there was no point. We had no drugs. It was only the most circumstantial evidence of any involvement in smuggling. It would have been the November bust all over again. It might have kept him out of the game for a couple of weeks, but he'd just go right back at it. And the worst thing would be that he'd be aware that he was being watched. We decided to leave it, but make sure we were far better prepared the second time around. Every customs officer has a system. George Stevens had several, but his favourite was to add together all the figures in their day's date, and then count off all the passing cars until he reached that number. So it was just by pure chance on the 14th of April 1996, car number 44, a white Mondeo passing through Dover at just after 9:45 PM, got pulled over for a random inspection. A training school, frontline inspectors spent hours learning how to read the subtle affectations of speech and body language that can help indicate that a person is lying. It might be a brief loss of eye contact, a minor shudder in the voice, even an idle hand gesture. Mastering and fine-tuning such a skill can take many years of dedicated service, but as any customs officer will tell you, many of those who pass through make it so obvious they are hiding something that even a trained monkey can tell. As the white Mondeo pulled over to one side, George Stevens walked over to the driver's window and waited for him to wind it down. "Good evening, sir," said Stevens. "Would you mind telling me your name and where you've been?" The driver was a small-time crook hired by Tate's gang at short notice. He was nervous and turned out to be hopeless at hiding it. Sure. My name's Angelikos. Craig Angelikos. I've just come back from Paris. I was over there seeing this bird that I met a couple of weeks ago. Yeah? I see. And is this your car, sir? No. There was a pause. It's hired. A friend of mine hired it. Who was that then? There was another pause. This time slightly longer. The customs officer spoke again. I need to know the name of your friend who hired the car, sir. Tiny beads of sweat formed on Craig's forehead as he struggled to remember. Struggled to stay cool. And then in a flash, the name came to him. Nick Reynolds. It was not the most convincing performance he had hoped for, so was hardly surprised when he was asked to get out of the car so it could be searched. His situation quickly went from bad to worse. The obvious place to start was the glove box, where Stevens found the agreement from Budget Rent-A-Car. This car's been hired by someone called Darren Nichols. Angelikos could have kicked himself. Oh yeah, that's him. That's my friend. Silly me. In the boot, Stevens found a pair of fisherman's waders. They were still damp with seawater and had sand sticking to them. In his hand luggage, Stephen found maps of the Netherlands and Belgium. In his pockets were scraps of paper with names and mobile phone numbers. It was all pretty suspicious, but it was nothing illegal, nothing to warrant an arrest. And he knew it. So having gone through everything once with a fine-tooth comb, Stevens decided to search the car all over again before finally letting the man go, and then running back to the office to run a few names through the computer. Around the 30th of April 1996, Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley retired after more than 30 years in the police force. The celebrations were only slightly marred by the fact there had been no arrest in the resident case. After all, Dibley knew exactly who had done it and how. As he handed over the investigation to Detective Superintendent Brian Story, the man who had pursued the drug dealers behind the death of Leah Betts, he knew that at the most it was only a couple of weeks before arrests were made. With so much groundwork having been already done, Story's task, though no means easy, was greatly simplified. He organised a mass briefing between the police and customs team to discuss tactics. It didn't take long. It was clear that the boat was the key factor, and a decision was taken to place G&T commercials under 24-hour surveillance. Customs spotter planes were already put on standby, and dozens of undercover officers were earmarked for duty. As soon as the transmissions from their mobile phones showed they were on their way back north, the whole shooting match would swing into action. This time, there would be no mistake. There were so many red faces at the Monday morning police and customs briefing, it looked like a clown convention. The operation had been meticulously planned, highly expensive, and swallowed valuable resources and manpower, but it also looked like a complete failure. Undercover officers had watched as Steele had met Worms at G&T commercials and picked up the boat. They had seen the boat being filled up with petrol, and Steele, driven by Nichols along with Gwinnett, arriving to meet Worms. They had followed the party down to the marina and seen the boat launched. From there, a spotter plane with a thermal imaging camera had followed the boat as it crossed the channel and eventually moored off the coast of Belgium at Blankenberg. The plane had to break off to refuel. Normally 2 would have been used on this sort of operation, but one had a fault. But it resumed a couple of hours later and picked up the boat on its way back to England. So far, so good. For the first time, thanks to the plane, customs were able to see where Steele had landed the boat, just along from the pier at Clacton. We always assumed it would have been somewhere a bit more remote, says Bill Davidson. Anyone who walking along the promenade would have been able to see what was going on, but the advantage to Steele was that he could see anyone coming. There was no place to park up for effective surveillance, and no way of surprising him. I imagine Steele really liked the idea of being so open about it. There was always an element of bravado with everything he did. Quite a few of the officers chasing him don't mind saying they had a certain admiration for him. Once the landing point had been established, customs had expected the remainder of the operation to be plain sailing. They had thought the most likely scenario was that the 3 men would upload the boat and carry the drugs up the beach to a waiting vehicle. Instead, Worms drove the car right onto the beach itself, right up to the waterfront, and loaded the car there. Within seconds he was driving off again. A police team attempted to follow him, but he was soon lost in the night. The operation was starting to fall apart. "It caught us on the hop," says Bill Davison. "The plan had always been to wait until the drugs were landed and arrest the vehicle loaded with the drugs, and then wait until the boat came back into the harbour and pick up the rest of the gang. We could have gone in when the drugs were being uploaded, but that would have given Steele an easy escape route. All he would need to do was start the boat's engine and head out to sea. Even with our fastest cutters, we'd never have caught him. The surveillance team had worked virtually non-stop for 36 hours, but had nothing to show for it. And they had no drugs, no idea where they were being kept, no evidence of drugs even being smuggled. The decision was taken to put all the remaining sources on Nichols. He had played no part in the drugs operation since the previous afternoon, and both Story and Davidson had a strong hunch that he would pick up some of the cannabis the following day. Easy to follow and far too lazy to bother with any of the anti-surveillance techniques that Mick had previously taught him, Nichols was an easy target. He was also their last hope. Michael Steele and Jackie Street were bombing along the A12 towards the Ipswich roundabout in their Toyota RAV4, having left Great Bentley a little earlier in the day. Just up ahead, Peter Corey was driving Jack's blue transit van. The trio were on their way to G&T Commercials to see Jack. The call from Nichols had come only a few minutes earlier, but Steele was still taken by surprise when a convoy of unmarked cars suddenly appeared by his side, and a man in a uniform gestured at him to pull over. Steele put his foot down. Two of the pursuit cars also accelerated, weaving along the traffic to take up positions just ahead and just to the side of the Toyota. Steele tried to drive his way out of trouble, but was outclassed. Then the unmarked escort deliberately drove across his path, crashed into him and forcing him to a halt. A man leaps out and ran towards the driver's window. "I am DC Chappell from Essex Police, and I am arresting you both for suspicion of being concerned in the importation of controlled drugs." Steele stepped out and glanced at the front of his car. "Has he fucking damaged my bumper?" he said. One of the younger, keener officers stepped forward and put his hand on Steele's shoulder to guide him towards the car that would take him to the station. Steele's ice blue eyes burned a hole right for the youngster's hand. "Take your fucking hands off me, boy," said Steele. Never one to miss an opportunity, Steele would later lodge an official complaint about his arrest. He claimed the officers responsible had driven in a meticulous manner, which could have resulted in a serious injury, or even the death of him and his partner of 25 years. Steele also complained that when Jackie Street was finally released, she was horrified to discover that her home had been abused and damaged by the police. Money loaned to the couple from relatives was allegedly taken, and Street's vehicle was seized. "She'd been maliciously penalised by overzealous officers," wrote Steele. "She is now unable to perform normal daytime duties. She has no one to turn to." A few feet further down the road, the door of Jack's transit van was opened by DC Sanders, who slapped his palm down on the quivering shoulder of Peter Corey. "You're nicked," he said triumphantly. "You're under arrest for conspiracy to supply controlled drugs." Corey stepped down to be cautioned and handcuffed and glanced over at Michael Steele and Jackie Street, both surrounded by equal numbers of police officers. He swallowed hard and then spoke. "I don't know what you mean, mate." Jack Williams was at G&T Commercials cleaning down an engine when Bill Davidson and a few members of the police armed response unit approached him. "Okay, Jack," said Davidson, "put down the power washer." Jack's brow became a mass of furrows. "Actually, it's a pressure washer." Then Jack slowly turned around at the hordes of officers and gunmen surrounded him. "Fucking hell, Bill, this is a bit heavy, ain't it?" The following day, the evidence against him was starting to mount up. Nichols was beginning to realise how hopeless his situation was. In addition to all the police and customs surveillance records, which now included still pictures and video footage, the police also had access to the phone records of both Nichols and Steele. Again, Nichols took the no-comment road, but it was obvious he was being backed into a corner. In fact, with neither Steele or Williams being caught in possession of drugs, there was more evidence against him than anyone else. And then, once again, just when things were looking at their blackest, they got even worse. Just in a nutshell here, Darren, that there has been a large importation of cannabis resin to the country. Would you like to tell me who the officer was that you wished to have some dialogue with at the time? No comment. Alright. I can tell you at the moment, 2 police officers from Essex have been arrested and are currently in custody. Oh fuck. I don't fucking believe it. The officers have been charged with a number of offences, including some linked to the possession of controlled drugs. We have evidence that you have numerous dealings with one of the officers. Is there any comment you wish to make now? No. No fucking comment. As soon as the interview was over, Nichols asked to see the most senior officer available. What happened next was recorded by DC Winston in his pocketbook. I was in the company with Detective Superintendent Barrington when we spoke to Darren Nichols in an interview room. Nichols had signed the custody record to agree to be seen without a solicitor. The meeting had been requested by Mr. Nichols, who was introduced to Mr. Barrington. Nichols asked Mr. Barrington if he named the arresting police officer, would he confirm it? Mr. Barrington agreed. Mr. Nichols said, "Is it DC Jim?" Mr. Barrington confirmed this, and then he, Nichols, went on to say this was how he had gotten into trouble, wanted to say how it had been set up. Mr. Barrington explained that regardless of what information Mr. Nichols gave, that he would be responsible and have to accept any sentence passed on to him by the legal system. Mr. Nichols accepted this and asked about what protection would be given to him and his family. Mr. Barrington said that Mr. Nichols must be totally honest in all details given, so that an accurate judgment could be made regarding the level of protection offered. Mr. Nichols asked about protection in prison, and was told about the system of protection that was available for registered informants. Mr. Nichols said he would be given information regarding illegal activities of policemen, said that he did not say anything to DC Winston because he did not know if he could trust him. Mr. Barrington said that Mr. Nichols could trust him fully, and that he should tell him the whole truth of what his involvement was. Mr. Nichols stated that he was a registered informant of DC Jim. Mr. Barrington acknowledged this by stating that he knew all about that, and that he had sanctioned the payment to him, and that DC Winston had no involvement with DC Jim at all. Mr. Nichols said that for the last 6 months, he felt that he was being used, and that the drugs jobs were not his main concern, and that other serious things would be disclosed. I knew I didn't have any choice. I tried to put myself in Mick and Jack's shoes to wonder what was going through their minds, and pretty soon I realised I was totally effed. 2 days earlier, Jack had threatened to kill me. The next day he gets arrested. In Mick's case, I came round to collect some drugs, and an hour later he gets arrested. It was a good bet by now that they'd also been told that a couple of policemen had been nicked, and that I'd been talking to one of them. It wouldn't take too long for them to put 2 and 2 together, and even if they didn't work out I was giving information about the smuggling side of things, I was still the weak link in the murder case. And now the cops were talking about remanding me in custody in Chelmsford Prison. That's exactly where they were going to put Mick and Jack and the others. I wouldn't last 5 minutes. It was time to start talking. Few, if any, of the 40 or so people who sign up on the witness protection programs in the United Kingdom each year have any idea of just what they are letting themselves in for. Although it inevitably involves a major, often traumatic change in their circumstances, the decisions almost always have to be taken in a matter of minutes, overnight at most. Although they are generally lumped together, there are in fact 2 distinct categories of protected witness. The first is the innocent bystander, for example the housewife who sees a gangland execution from her living room window. Should such a witness agree to give evidence, they would first be moved into a hotel, all expenses paid, and have statements taken. There will be assigned 1 or sometimes 2 police handlers, whose job is to ensure their comfort and safety at all times. In the run-up to the trial, they will be asked to choose where they would like to live. If they're a homeowner, the police will arrange the purchase of a new property and the sale of the old. If they rent from a council, the police will arrange for them to move into a new area with a minimum of fuss. Until they are settled into a new job, who were paid a salary the same as what they were earning before, in addition to any reward. They will, of course, still be restricted from seeing their friends and families ever again, but because the crooks generally have little idea who they are or who they associate with, the danger to those around them is fairly minimal. Depending on the severity of the threat against them, such witnesses can even choose to relocate to a number of countries around the world. Witnesses are often awarded large sums from public funds, and in the case of those who inform on robbers or major thefts, they can receive tens of thousands of pounds from banks or insurance companies. When truck driver Chris Booker was asked to drive a shipment of heroin worth £2 million into the United Kingdom, he went straight to the police. His evidence saw the gang of 3 sent to prison, and Booker was given a new identity, and rewards and payments totalling more than £80,000. When it comes to testifying in court, any jury in the land would have little difficulty understanding what an enormous sacrifice the person has made, all in the interest of justice, and their evidence will be treated with the utmost respect. They have no criminal connections, they have no interior motive. Even the defence barristers will shy away from attacking such a witness too harshly for fear of turning the jury against their own clients. The second category of protected witness enjoys no such privileges. They are, like Nichols, professional criminals who turned grass because it is their only choice they have. Failure to cooperate with the police will either lead to a long prison sentence or, in the worst case scenario, certain death. The major difference between the first and second categories is that the police will never let the second, no matter how critical their evidence, no matter how key their role is in the forthcoming trial, forget that they are criminals. Rather than being kept in a hotel or safe house, they are more likely to spend their first 3 months being moved from special prison units to police stations as they make their statements. Even a glimpse of someone they think they recognise means that they will be instantly be moved. Rather than being given some form of income the same as what they had before, they are reduced to living on benefits. The idea is that if you admit to having made some money from the crime in the past, all your past earnings are tainted with the same brush. Only by reducing your income to virtually nothing, and the police hope to counter any accusations of bribery or favouritism. Furthermore, in order to ensure that the subject comes across as a witness with nothing to hide, they must first confess to every single crime they have ever committed, even the crimes they were never caught for. Not only must they confess, but they must agree to plead guilty to the crimes in court, and accept whatever sentence the judge wishes to hand out to them. Failure to do this can invalidate their place on the programme. The last thing the police want mid-trial is the defence to suddenly bring up the fact that their key witness was involved in organising an armed robbery with one of the defendants 5 years earlier. There are no guarantees, no promises. Protected witness status merely means that the police will inform the judge that you have been an assistance to them. It is up to the judge to gauge how valuable that assistance has been and whether or not the subject deserves a reduction in their sentence. There are plenty of cases where witnesses have been given longer sentences than those that they are given evidence against, particularly in cases where the trial has collapsed or the accused have walked free. The phrase supergrass was first coined in 1973 when Derek Bertie Smalls, an active armed robber who had been involved in a £138,000 robbery in Wembley, was tracked to his Northampton hideout for his au pair girl. Caught banged to rights and facing a long sentence, Smalls offered to strike a deal. If the Home Secretary gave him a written guarantee that he himself would be immune from prosecution for every crime he'd ever committed, then he would happily give evidence against everyone he had ever worked with. Within a year, Smalls' evidence led to more than 150 arrests, and 21 of his former associates were jailed for a total of 308 years. Bertie Smalls never served a single day. Panic spread throughout the underworld like wildfire. Dozens of hardened villains, worried about what Smalls might be saying about them, began to give evidence themselves, and the spectacle of one member of a gang appearing as the star witness in a trial of the others became a regular one. The numbers increased further still, after stories of the treatment provided to self-professed King Squealer Lawrence O'Mahony began to emerge. While being held at Chiswick Police Station, he would get his favourite paper every morning, alongside with his tea and toast. When it came to meal times, food was brought in from local restaurants and served with linen napkins and silver-plated cutlery. To prevent him from going stir-crazy, he'd be taken from his cell every now and then for a boozing session or a slap-up meal or for a day at the races. It was even said that prostitutes were provided on a regular basis. Little wonder then that some of the most violent, vicious, vile men in criminal history suddenly came forward wanting to tell all, knowing that regardless of what they had done, they would not face prosecution themselves. A bad taste started to develop in the mouths of the public by the early 80s, when characters like John Charles, the head of Britain's only known Murder Incorporated style contract killing company, decided to implicate former colleagues in 6 murders rather than face the rap for a huge series of robberies. Charles was rewarded with a single life sentence and no recommended minimal term at a time when the memory of the Cray twins, who had each killed one person but received 30-year minimum sentences, was still fresh in many minds. Within a few years, after a number of trials started to collapse, the whole notion of the supergrass had completely fallen out of favour with both police and juries. Today, under the new name of protected witness, They are rarely if ever granted full immunity from prosecution, and the levels of comfort they are allowed to receive are strictly monitored. At first, Darren Nichols talked only about Jim, how he'd met him, how he'd led him to the drugs in the lake, how they'd fabricated a story about where the drugs had come from, and how they'd shared the reward. Then he moved on to talk about what he'd told Jim about Michael Steele, how he'd passed on details about all the importations he'd known about, and how Jim had failed to do anything about any of them. When the tape ran out, they started again, talking about how Steele had imported drugs since the beginning of the year, and how he'd given Jim his theory on the reasons behind the killings of Tate, Tucker and Rolfe. When it came to Nichols' own involvement in smuggling and selling drugs, he'd only gone abroad once, and then his passport had run out. He never spoke to Dopey Harris, just sat in the bar drinking beers. He'd never made any money from selling drugs. He deliberately fudged the truth to make himself look good, to look like some concerned citizen who had just happened to be friendly with a couple of drug dealers and had decided to help bring them to justice. At the time it seemed like the best option. The only policeman he'd ever spoken to before that had betrayed him. He simply didn't know who to trust. Eventually, as the interviews moved on and focused more and more on the murder, so Nichols began to open up and be more honest. His full involvement in Steele's importations became clear, as did his role in distributing and selling drugs around Braintree and other Essex towns. But there was no going back over the first interviews, and his early reticence and lies would turn out to be a mistake that would come back to haunt him with a vengeance. Officially, the Protected Witness Unit does not exist. For many years it was based at HMP Woodhill in Bedfordshire, but recently it moved to another prison in the south of England, the location of which is a closely guarded secret. It used to house criminals who have agreed to provide valuable assistance to police and other law enforcement agencies. In other words, supergrasses. The Protected Witness Unit is intended to offer them absolute protection from other prisoners by ensuring that no one knows who they really are. The inmates are even told to keep their true identities secret from one another and from prison staff. Instead of their real names, every one of the dozen inmates is referred to as Blogs, followed by a number. Darren Nichols was Blogs 19. Protected Witness Unit is a prison within a prison. The idea is not so much to prevent the inmates from escaping. The vast majority know only too well they are far safer inside than out, but to prevent anyone from breaking in. By February 1997, Darren Nichols had been in custody for the best part of a year, and had for the first time ever failed to spend Christmas with his wife and family. Sandra was by now firmly ensconced in the new safe house, but despite repeated requests, the police ruled that for his own protection, Nichols had to remain in custody until after the trial. After his initial arrest, when Nichols was being held in numerous police stations across Essex, Sandra saw him every couple of weeks, and the pair would tip the custody sergeant to turn a blind eye while they had frantic sex on his cell bed. But once Nichols moved to the Blogs unit, Sandra could no longer bring herself to go. By this time round, Sandra didn't have her friends and family around her to support her during the separation. In fact, she felt completely isolated and was terrified of saying anything that could accidentally put her life in jeopardy. As the gulf between him and his wife widened, Darren Nichols spent weeks arguing with the police and the courts that the only way to save his family was to allow him to live with them. After all, the family would be living in the same safe house once the trial had finished. How could it be unsafe one day, then magically be safe the next? At first the police were reluctant to give any ground, but Nichols started threatening to withdraw his statements, to refuse to take the stand. Eventually the police agreed to refer Sandra to an expert psychiatrist and placed the decision in his hands. The report by Dr. Albert Fox, published on February the 5th, 1997, was damning. Since Mrs. Nichols was taken with her children suddenly and without initial explanation in the middle of the night into police custody last May, she has had 3 destructive moves of home. She weeps quite often and has the wish to go to sleep until it is all over. These changes involve domicile, school and identities. I can't even tell the neighbours my real name. The whole thing's a farce. What hurts most is probably separation from her husband, from whom she has a good relationship. No contact for 4 months, except by daily 5-minute phone calls. Lonely is the only thing I feel. I can't make friends like other people have friends. Never could. Paula tells me to go and talk to other mothers at school, but I just can't. Paula's not sympathetic. She's got no understanding of what I'm going through. It's just a job to her. She doesn't get involved emotionally. Mrs. Nichols wept a good deal during the interview. How does she sleep? Under a rug on a sofa in front of the TV mostly. As soon as you get your head into bed, you're awake. You toss and turn and think about it all. She has also started drinking a bottle of wine a night for something to do, for oblivion. The report concluded the sooner the family can be reunited with their father, the better. On the 24th of February 1997, Darren Nichols was granted bail on condition that he reside at the safe house with his family and adhered to certain guidelines. There was to be a strict curfew, which meant he was only able to leave his home between 8 AM and 8 PM. He was never allowed to travel more than 25 miles from his front door, and he was not allowed to seek any form of employment. Any breach would mean an immediate return to prison. At first, Sandra enjoyed having her husband back, but the dream quickly turned into a nightmare. The murder trial was set to begin at the Old Bailey on the 1st of September, and as the weeks went by, Sandra watched her husband become more and more frustrated, more and more stressed, and increasingly bitter and angry about his situation and what the future held for him. As the trial loomed even nearer, Darren Nichols became more and more nervous about what might happen. In particular, the prospect of Mick and Jack going free played on his mind. He found it impossible to talk about it with his wife, who was becoming increasingly bitter about the enforced separation from her family. His police handlers had no time for him unless he was making statements. Nichols decided to make a video diary of his thoughts and feelings. He began filming himself at home. Such was his relief at being able to offload his anxieties. He even smuggled the camera into his prison cell to help him cope with the stresses and strains in the final days before the trial. The first suspicion that the police might have arrested the wrong men, that Michael Steele and Jack Womes were not the killers, and that the testimony of Darren Nichols was a complete pack of lies, came less than 2 weeks after the opening of the 5-month murder trial. Through the auspices of the Police and Criminal Evidence Act, PACE 1984, there are strict guidelines that prevent officers from discussing any evidence or any aspect of the case with someone in custody, except during formal recorded interviews. Officers are, however, allowed to make welfare visits to ensure the suspect is being properly looked after. Ideally, the officers responsible for such visits should not be the same officers responsible for conducting interviews with the suspect. As the triple murder trial unfolded, it emerged that during his first week in custody, the detectives responsible for interviewing Nichols had made some 36 hours worth of welfare visits, including one single visit lasting a mammoth 7 hours and 43 minutes. Even the solicitor acting for Nichols, Lee Craddock, expressed surprise at the length of the meetings and agreed with the court that it was an undesirable situation for his client to have found himself in. Graham Parkins QC, the highly experienced barrister acting on behalf of Michael Steele, confidently explained to the jury exactly what had happened. Essex police, desperate to convict Steele, had used the visits to give Nichols a script containing what would later become his evidence. The whole story Nichols had given was, in fact, a fabrication, and Nichols was playing along purely to save himself from more serious charges. Parkins accused Detective Constable Chris Winstone, who interviewed Nichols after his initial arrest, of helping him, prompting him, and suggesting things that he hadn't said in order to make his story sound more convincing. The evidence of this was everywhere. Parkins showed that during one recorded interview, the tape was turned off for 20 minutes while Nichols went to the toilet. When he returned, Lee Craddock confirmed that no discussions had taken place while the tape had been switched off. In fact, Craddock had been out the room making telephone calls at the time and had no idea what might have been said. Extracts of other taped interviews were played. In one, Nichols was talking eloquently about a particular sequence of events and then stumbled. "I fucked up the story here again," he said. "No, you're right, mate, go on," came Winston's reply. In another, Nichols paused when he had trouble recalling the name of an associate. In the background, a faint sound like someone else's voice was heard, a prompt. Immediately before Nichols began speaking again. In other tapes, Nichols sounded distinctly as though he was reading out something rather than speaking his own words. Parkins showed the jury the early statements Nichols had made and pointed out how they told a very different story to the one that later formed the bulk of the prosecution case. Parkins also pointed out that Nichols only began speaking and naming Worms and Steele as the killers after he himself had been charged with the murders. While giving evidence for the prosecution, Nichols had been poised and confident, but under cross-examination, as cracks in his story began to appear, so his answers became less precise, less convincing. Has anyone told you to keep it vague? Parkins asked one day, frustrated with the inability of Nichols to answer a straight question. I put it to you that the final version of what the jury has heard is not your own work. You've been prompted, helped and guided by other police officers. That's not true. Mr. Nichols, are you a truthful man by nature? I don't think you can say I am, but I'm telling the truth now. But Mr. Nichols, how does one know when you are lying and when you are not? You are both a blatant and persistent liar. An opportunist, I suggest, grasping at straws to save yourself. By December the 6th, you knew Mr. Steele very well, and had the means to make up a plausible story about him and his colleagues. Yes, if I wished to do so, but they did do the killings. Are you falsely accusing these men when you know who is really responsible? They did it. Do you want to protect yourself and others who are not before this court? No, they did it. Were you involved in these murders yourself with other men? Look, I've told you, I picked them up from the murders they committed. I was badly affected by it, Nichols replied angrily. Were you indeed? You told these officers you didn't really want anything to do with Mr. Steele after the killings. You had been duped into ferrying the men to and from a triple shooting. If you are telling the truth, an awful evil thing has been done to you. Yes, that's right. Mr. Steele would hardly be on your Christmas card list. No. Can you explain then why you sent his family a card for Christmas 1995? Nichols said nothing. Steele, sitting in the dock, allowed himself a wary smile. Parkins continued. You also gave this man you claim is a killer a case of canned beer and a bottle of wine. Nichols shifted uneasily in the witness box. Yes, he mumbled, but only because he gave my children a present. Oh yes, a radio-controlled aeroplane, which you went flying at Mr. Steele's house. Isn't it true that you then took your children to the house of the triple killer so you could watch rabbits running in his garden? Yes, said Nichols softly. A few days later, Graham Parkins began examining the mysterious threatening phone calls that Steele received from Ireland and uncovered the most dramatic twist yet to the murder saga. It emerged that Billy and John, the gruesome twosome that had called both Michael Steele and Sarah Saunders, were nothing more than a figment of Detective Superintendent Ivan Dibley's imagination. The idea behind it was to try to flush Steele out for an undercover police operation and to try and meet with him, says Dibley. We took a bit of a gamble because we didn't know whether Steele knew for sure who Tucker and Tate were supplying the drugs to. We chose Ireland because it was outside Steele's immediate circle. We didn't want to be operating somewhere where he might have contacts, and because the terrorist link added a bit of extra pressure. Also, if we'd made the team somewhere else in the country, Steele could have just told them to find another supplier. Being across the water, it made it more understandable why they were so keen to keep the established supply chain going. We hoped it might run as a long-term project, that through a series of meetings we might eventually gain his trust, and that some months down the line he might just say to us, yeah, I was the guy who did the murders. As it happens, he didn't take the bait. Right from the start he denied he was involved, so we got nowhere. But I still supported the operation. We switched to Sarah because it seemed clear there was some sort of close relationship between the two, but that wasn't successful either, and the operation was shut down. In one of his early interviews, Nichols had mixed up the order of events. Knowing that Tate had borrowed some money off the Joneses, and knowing that Tate had later threatened to kill Steele, Nichols implied that the threatening calls from Ireland had come before the murders and were part of the reason Steele decided to kill Tate. Graham Parkins was quick to seize on the error as further evidence of police colluding with Nichols to concoct the perfect story. You now know the Irish threat was in reality two policemen. You were told that by other officers, weren't you? No. You made a massive blunder when you put them forward as the motive, and that claim didn't appear in your later witness statements. Was that because the officers interviewing you said, hold on, the Irish brothers were policemen, and they only rang up after the killings? No, you'd have to be in my situation to understand. You try and explain it to someone that you've been a witness to a murder. I was very confused. On the 3rd of November, after 10 weeks of sitting quietly and taking in all that had been said about him, Michael Steele himself rose and under heavy escort moved to the witness box. Under cross-examination, the first thing he would have been asked about was his criminal record, so with attack being the best form of defence, he decided to get it on out in the open straight away. "Is it true that you are content with the jury to know things about your past?" asked Parkins. "I would like the jury to know everything there is to know about me," Steele replied. Parkins then cleared his throat and read out a list of previous convictions. In March 1964, Steele went to prison for 12 months for stealing property and driving whilst disqualified. March 1996, 6 months for stealing property and assault causing actual bodily harm. June 1966, 12 months conditional discharge for stealing from a vehicle. April 1968, fine for possession of an offensive weapon, a motorbike chain. February 1969, 18 months for trying to cheat customs of oil duty, the red diesel scam. March 1972, 5 years for theft from a vehicle. February 1980, 6 months suspension for theft. September 1980, 12 months for theft. August 1986, criminal discharge for criminal damage. June 1990, 9 years for importing cannabis. "Do not hold the past against him," Graham Parkins told the jury after he had finished reading the list of his convictions. "He has paid his debt to society, should not be branded a triple killer. Judge him solely on this case." That Steele's account of the events leading up to the death of Tate, Tucker and Rolfe would be somewhat different to that of Darren Nichols was a given, but just how different came as a shock to everyone. Nichols is what you call a suicide jockey. He's a major drug smuggler who travels abroad regularly to bring shipments of cannabis into the country. The cannabis is loaded into the boots of cars in France and Belgium and driven onto the ferry and then through customs. That's where the name comes from, because the chances of being caught are so high. What you do is bring 3 cars in at a time. That way, if one goes down, you still make money. Steele told the hushed courtroom. According to Steele, by the time the pair met in prison, Steele, stunned at the length of his prison sentence, had decided to give up smuggling for good. Nichols, on the other hand, was fascinated and eager to start up a drugs-based business of his own. Once both men were released, Nichols would visit Steele, eager to pick up advice. Nichols had the room next door to mine, so I saw him every day. My first impression that he was a fool. I didn't like the man at all, but after a while he grew on me. I was released in June 1993. He got my number and rang me on a regular basis just to chat, even though he never seemed to have much to say. He'd pick up the phone and say, "Yes, Darren," and there'd be a pause. It would always be you that would have to make conversation. He's what I call an habitual, always turning up on my doorstep. Sometimes I would just say something to get rid of him. I found there were 2 sides to him, a very silly side and a very educated side. In the early hours of one morning in November 1994, Steele said he received a phone call at home. He let Jackie answer it, thinking it was her brother, who because of his job as an all-night taxi driver, often called at odd hours. It was Sarah Saunders, explaining that Pat Tate had been shot and was in hospital. According to Steele, Nichols called a few days afterwards for one of his usual chats and knew nothing about the shooting. When Steele told him, he immediately demanded Tate's phone number. Steele called Tate at the hospital to ensure it was okay to pass it on, and then called Nichols back. A few days later after that, Nichols turned up at Steele's house, looking miserable. He had been to visit Pat Tate in hospital, and he and his friends had taken the piss out of him, bullying him quite badly, and making him run around like a little errand boy. Steele explained. He was standing with his hands in his pockets and his head bowed. He looked like a child that had been scolded. Then Nichols said something very odd, something I'll never forget. He said, "I could do that. I could shoot someone." I've often thought to myself about it. I always remember it because of the way he said it. That thing about having spoken to himself about it. You see, when you get to know Nichols, he was a schizophrenic. After that, Steele kept in touch with Nichols because he needed lots of work done. First on his business unit and eventually in his new home. And Nichols was cheaper than anyone else. Over the next year or so, Nichols and Steele spent a great deal of time socialising. Much of the story Nichols had put before the court, reported Steele, was either a twisting of the true facts or simply a switch, where Nichols had substituted Steele's name for his own. It was Nichols who was the phone box man, not him. It was Nichols who was in contact with drug suppliers in Amsterdam, not him. It was Nichols who had panicked when Leah Betts had died, not him. It was Nichols who had made the comment about looking in the phone book and picking the killers, not him. During his first 2 days in the witness box, Steele systematically countered or rubbished every single one of the allegations Nichols had made against him. If anyone had killed Tate, Tucker and Rolfe, it had to be Nichols. How else would he have known so much about what had happened and how they died? But his friendship with Steele made it easy for him to pin the crime on a man who, because of his criminal background, must have seemed a soft target. It was particularly hurtful to hear Nichols lying about him and accusing him of a triple murder, as throughout their friendship, Steele had been nothing but a friend to Nichols and had never shown him any malice. Over the months, Darren Nichols had got to know everything there was to know about me, Steele told the court. He knew about all my habits, all my background, all my friends. He would come round my house, he would hang around my workshop, and he would also join in on our social outings. For example, we was in a pub one day with Jackie near Point Clear, and I told him about a friend of mine who had got into a bit of trouble with a Range Rover when he tried to take it down to the beach. The differential lock got stuck on some pole sticking out in the sand. I was telling Nichols all about the things he'd tried, and I eventually got it out. Nichols then twisted that story around and claimed it happened to me and Jack when we were coming back from a smuggling run, but it never happened. Not to me. Never. As for smuggling drugs across the channel, I would say the easiest way to do it would have to be a plane. That was what I used to do it, and if I was ever going to do it again, that is how I would do it now. I am experienced as a pilot. I qualified in 1970 and am multi-engine rated, which means I can fly any propeller aircraft. Darren Nichols has never been in my boat in his life. I don't think he's ever been in any boat. You can tell from the way he speaks about it. He claimed that during the time we supposedly crossed the channel at night with a load of drugs, I had the GPS on. That's nonsense. When you're out at night, it's critical you have good night vision, that your eyes are accustomed to the dark. If you have the GPS, which is basically a small bright TV screen, then you wouldn't be able to see anything. You're effectively blinded. It just wouldn't happen. It proves he's a liar. Steele spoke about his friendship with Pat Tate, how the pair had been so close that they'd even taken foreign holidays together on a number of occasions. The jury was shown photos of the pair laughing and joking together. Steele's partner Jackie Street was also firm friends with Sarah Saunders, and the pair would call each other most nights. When I first met Pat, he had a magnetic personality. He was lovely to be with. He never changed with me, but over the years he became more and more of a junkie. It was sad to watch what's happening. Towards the end, 70% of me disliked him, but the other 30% of me loved him. When he and Sarah split up, he was getting out of control. He said a lot of things I'm sure he did not mean. He told Sarah that he didn't want me to see her anymore. He said to her, "Mickey and Jackie, they're not your friends, they're my friends. And they're only putting up with you because I want it, because I say so." He started telling her lies that we were saying about her. He was doing anything to upset her, and it worked. He was still giving her money to look after their son, but when things got really bad, he started being cruel about it. Rather than giving her money once a week, he let her go 10 or 15 days. Sometimes she was desperate. I lent her £100 once, just to help her get through. Sarah is very nice. She's a very, very nice person. She took to me. I was like a father to her. It's total rubbish about an affair though. Nonsense. She is a woman of 24. I am a man of 55. Steele told the jury that the bullying incident in the hospital was one of a number that over time increased the tension between Nichols and Tate. The situation broke down completely after Nichols brought over some dodgy cannabis and sold it onto the firm. With Tate on the warpath, furious at being made to look a fool, Nichols went round to see Steele once more. Tate wanted to meet Nichols, but Nichols wouldn't go near him. He was terrified of the man, Steele told the court. I ended up being the go-between. Pat would call me, and I'd call Nichols and vice versa. Pat asked me to chaperone Nichols to Amsterdam, where I was told he was going to retrieve some money. I didn't know what was going on. I didn't know who he was getting the money back from, and I never saw it handed over. Nichols gave me Tate's share, and then made himself scarce while I gave it to Tate, who took £2,000 out of it as my fee for going along. That's all I had to do with it. As for the gun that had been found in the loft of his house, the one that Nichols had claimed that he had asked him to buy shortly before the murder, the truth was he had never seen it before in his life, he said. When the gun was originally recovered, Steele quickly made the following statement. During the search of my premises, a firearm has been recovered. Because of the death of 2 or 3 persons known to me, I have now been charged with those killings. Forensic science will prevail and totally exempt the weapon found at my premises. In court, he explained that once he had had a neighbour, an old man who was a bit strange and paranoid, who kept a gun in his loft that wasn't found until after he died. Having only moved into the bungalow only a few months earlier, Steele was convinced the gun had a similar origin. He knew he had nothing to worry about. That court number 2 at the Old Bailey might be witnessing an almighty miscarriage of justice seemed even more likely when on his 3rd day in the witness box, Michael Steele finally shared his alibi for the night of the murder. At 5:01 p.m. on the 6th of December 1995, the exact same time that Nichols claimed Steele had pulled up outside the motorcycle shop in Marks Tay in his red Toyota Hilux, Steele had concrete proof that he was somewhere else. Graham Parkins produced a credit card receipt signed by Steele, showing he was buying petrol from a Texaco garage on the A120, some 8 miles and at least 20 minutes away. Furthermore, the till receipt showed that Steele was buying 4-star petrol. The Hilux, the vehicle in which Nichols claimed he arrived in at the rendezvous, ran on diesel. As far as alibis go, it was about as strong as they come, and Steele knew it. It's shockproof, rockproof, and everything else, he said. We then drove to Tesco's, and I waited in the car while Jackie went in, bought a couple of bottles of wine. From then we drove to the village of Bullpen near Brentwood, where we picked up the boat trailer from the house of Dennis Womes, Jack's uncle. We arrived at his house and knocked several times, but there was no answer, so I hitched up the trailer and drove home. Steele told the jury that he and Jackie Street arrived home at Oakland's at 7:25 p.m. 5 minutes later, Steele's sister-in-law and her daughter arrived to view the property, with a view to possibly buying it. "Did you go to Rettendon on that night?" asked Parkins. "Nowhere near Rettendon," Steele replied confidently. "We came straight home." Jackie Street did not appear at the Old Bailey. Doctors confirmed that she had been suffering from severe depression since Steele's arrest, and was therefore not fit to attend court in person. After a round of legal argument, the judge agreed that the statement she had given before coming ill could be read out. It confirmed everything Steele had said. Further corroboration came from postwoman Phyllis Stanbrook, Steele's sister-in-law from his first marriage, who told the court that the night of the murders was the night she and her daughter Gemma went to Steele's home. When we arrived, they were having a celebration. They had signed a contract that day for a new property, and we had champagne. She confirmed that she had arrived at the house in Great Bentley at 7:30 p.m, and Steele was already there. Parkins explained that with the murders said to have taken place between 6:45 and 7 p.m, it would have been impossible for Steele to have been in the 2 places that night. He could not possibly be responsible for the murders. Like Michael Steele, Jack Womes had originally been advised against appearing in the dock. During the trial, particularly when he saw how well Steele was managing to defend himself, he changed his mind. It proved to be an emotional experience. Speaking to his defence barrister, David Lederman QC, Womes agreed that he had been in prison at the same time as Pat Tate, and also agreed that he was an expert shot, having used his father's 12-ball shotguns from the time he was a young boy to shoot rabbits and dead branches off trees. When Lederman put it to him that the prosecution would say he cold-bloodedly killed Tate along with Tucker and Rolfe, Womes could no longer hold back his feelings. "I could not even kill a sparrow. Anyone who knows me knows I am not capable of killing. To say I killed these men is ridiculous. I did not know Mr. Tucker, and I did not know Mr. Rolfe. The last time I saw Pat Tate was when he was being transferred from a prison near Havenhill, Suffolk, with my brother Johnny. He was a friend." Lederman then suggested that Womes was put up for the shooting by Steele. Womes raised his voice again. "I would not do it for anybody. I could not do it. Why would I want to do it? I deny it. I deny any suggestion that I had anything to do with drugs or murder. All the stuff about the Duff drugs deal is rubbish. I would much rather put money into motors. I would never deal in drugs. Holmes told the jury how while working as a bouncer, he had seen a girl high on drugs take her clothes off and dance naked. There was this girl like Leah Betts. She'd had some bad gear and was foaming at the mouth. That worried me sick, and I called an ambulance for her. I told undercover police to come in and search for drugs. Then, without warning, Holmes burst into tears and began sobbing uncontrollably in the witness box. I did not do anything like that. What they're suggesting is ridiculous. They don't know what I'm going through, being locked up. They won't even let me cuddle my own son. Under cross-examination by Andrew Monday QC, Holmes admitted that he had indeed been in the Rettendon area at the time of the murders, but that it was just a pure and unfortunate coincidence. He claimed that Nichols had called him and asked him to pick up a broken down Volkswagen Passat from outside a pub on the A130, just a few hundred yards from the murder scene. That, said Holmes, explained his brief mobile phone call to Nichols. He was letting him know he'd got the car. Monday pointed out that his phone had been spotted in the area the day before the killings and suggested that he was scouting the murder scene. Holmes shook his head and told Monday that with the greatest of respect, he could not be more wrong. The day before the killings, he had simply gone to see his uncle in the village of Bulpen, also close to Rettendon, to pick up Steele's boat trailer. I banged on the door. I remember the letterbox in the middle of the door. I held it open with my fingers and shouted through it, but there was no one about. Finally, I left a note. Dennis Holmes, Jack's uncle, was brought in to corroborate the story. He agreed with Jack's version of events completely. He remembered that his nephew had indeed left a note to say that he'd called, but, not surprisingly, he had long since thrown it away. Ian Bristow, of the Forensic Engineers Association, seemed to confirm this version of events when he told the court that Holmes could have not have made the call logged in his mobile at 6:59 when Holmes was alleged to have told Nichols to come and get us, because his mobile signal would not work on either of the two aerials covering the crime scene. However, if he'd been on the nearby A130, he could have. Other witnesses, some of them former friends of Nichols, testified to the poor state of the Passat. It had no heater, a noisy exhaust, and to all intents a clutch that was unstable. The idea that anybody would use it as a getaway car for a triple murder was laughable. Finally, there was only a single footprint found on the ground by the offside back door of the Range Rover where the killer would have stood. It was identified as coming from a size 10 high-tech training shoe. Lederman pointed out that Jack Holmes wore a size 11 and, according to Nichols, was wearing Wellington boots at the time of the murder. In a nutshell, there was nothing, absolutely nothing, to suggest that Jack Holmes had ever been down the lane itself. If the jury looked at the facts, said Lederman, he could not possibly be responsible for the murders. Graham Parkins and David Lederman had more convincing cases for the innocence of their clients. If Steele and Holmes were truly the victims of a cruel fantasy created by Darren Nichols, if the evidence against them had been concocted, dreamed up and falsified with the help of the Essex police, if the lack of forensic and other evidence of their guilt was purely down to the fact that they had no guilt, it left only one question. If Steele and Holmes had not murdered Tate, Tucker and Rolfe, then who did? As the weeks had passed, the defence had offered up some tantalising possibilities without ever spilling out the allegations fully. It had emerged, for example, that the shotgun cartridges used in the murder were a type popular with clay pigeon shooters. DC Jim, who had been heard on tape discussing with Nichols ways of ripping Steele off by stealing his Jaguar while it was carrying £150,000, was a regular clay pigeon shooter. Jim was now under arrest. The implication was obvious. The mysterious Joneses brothers, from whom Tate had supposedly borrowed £40,000, were vaguely touted as another possibility, as were literally dozens of other members of the Essex and London underworld. But it wasn't until December, when the trial was in its 4th month, that a full, practical and detailed alternative explanation for the deaths came to court. And when it did, it was absolute dynamite. No one expected much the day that William George Jasper took the stand. A shaven head, squared-shouldered bruiser of an East End hardman. He spoke mostly in sentences of 5 words or less, in a sullen, monotone voice. But as his incredible story unfolded, the entire courtroom ended up hanging on his every syllable. Jasper had been arrested on theft and drug charges on the 16th of January 1996, a little more than a month after the murders. During his initial interviews at Rayleigh Police Station, he said little, but after a few hours, he began to relate the tale of the 5 large ones he'd earned for a bit of driving he'd done the months before. The saga began in a Mexican restaurant in Canning Town in the middle of December. Jasper, along with 2 leading members of an East End crime syndicate, were discussing what to do about a gang from Essex who had arranged to purchase some cocaine. The word on the street was that the Essex boys were not planning to hand over any cash, but instead had bought a machine gun and were going to rip off the London team. The Essex firm in question was of course none other than Tucker, Tate and Rolfe. The East End gang was run by Jesse Gale and a man known only as Mr. D. For Gale, the discussion had a personal element. He'd been ripped off by Tucker before, to the tune of £20,000, and there was no way he was going to let it happen again. As the beers flowed and the enchiladas went down, so the conversation got more serious. "Why don't we rob 'em?" said Gale. Mr. D shook his head. "We can't do that. There'll be too many comebacks. We're better off taking them out of the game, putting them out of misery." Now it was Gale's turn to shake his head. "Nah, just rob 'em," he said. Mr. D then turned to Jasper and asked him if he wanted to earn £5,000 for a night's driving. On the evening of the 6th of December, 1995, the night of the murders, Jasper picked up a grey Fiat Uno Turbo from outside the Peacock Gym in East London. He drove to a bar near Hornchurch, where he picked up Mr. D, who was carrying a sports bag. Jasper soon learned the bag contained a sawn-off shotgun and a 9mm Browning pistol. From there, the pair travelled to a cab office, where they found Jesse Gale waiting outside. Jasper waited in the car while Mr. D got out, taking the bag with him, and disappeared with Gale down an alleyway. 10 minutes or so later, Mr. D returned and told Jasper to drive him to Retterdon. Pulling up alongside a lane close to a garden centre, Mr. D got out, again with the bag, told Jasper he was going to pick up 4 kilos of cocaine. He returned around 40 minutes later carrying the sports bag and also a foot-square rucksack. As the pair drove back to London, Mr. D called Jesse Gale and told him everything was sorted. It was only when he saw the news of the murders the following day that he realised what had happened. He had already arranged to meet Jesse Gale the following evening at Morton's bar in order to pick up his fee, and he turned up just before 10 p.m. I thought they were going to just do a deal, but somewhere along the line they changed their mind. When I got to Morton's bar the next night, Gale was already there. He asked me what I wanted to drink. I said Jack Daniels and Coke, and he got me a large one. I had a couple of mouthfuls, and then he said he was going to the toilet, and for me to wait a couple of minutes and then follow him. I found him in a cubicle, cutting up some cocaine. I had a couple of snorts, then he gave me the money. I said something like, "You cunt, you fucking took them out of the game." He gave me a little grin, a smirk, and said, "Don't ask questions. What are you, a cozzer?" And that was my intro to shut up. Jasper's testimony seemed to be the final piece in the jigsaw as far as the defence were concerned. They had solely proved beyond doubt that Darren Nichols was a liar. He had admitted as much himself. Yet Steele and Williams had solid alibis from where they were and what they were doing the night that Tate, Tucker and Rolfe had died, and that they'd provided a highly convincing alternative explanation at how the men had met their death. In the public gallery, relatives of the family of Jack Williams were starting to feel confident that things would go their way, while the relatives of the dead men were starting to shuffle around uneasily. "The whole case has been unnerving for all the family," said Marie Tate. But Billy Jasper's evidence was the most unnerving of all. They were not the only ones suffering. In September 1996, 5 months after their arrest, and exactly a year before the trial had begun, Michael Steele and Jack Williams had appeared at Belmarsh Magistrates Court. After a week of evidence, the trial was passed on to the Crown Court, and the trio were told they had 7 days to file notice of alibi. If they had witnesses or evidence that proved they could not be responsible for the murder, they had only a week to submit it. The rule is a simple extension of the caution given to anyone who is arrested, that while they have the right to remain silent, if they later in court rely on something they have not previously mentioned, the jury can be made aware of this. In other words, if rather than explaining their actions or whereabouts straight away, they appear to have gone away and had a good think about it, about the best possible excuse, then the jury has a right to know. For Steele and Wilmes, their alibis had seemed straightforward enough, if slightly weakened by the fact that their only witnesses were relatives. What weakened them far more was the revelation that the pair had not submitted their alibis until July 1997, more than 10 months late and just 8 weeks before the start of the trial. Not only that, Steele's shockproof, rockproof alibi quickly began to crumble. The till receipt didn't necessarily relate to the credit card slip. Anyone could have bought the petrol at that garage at 5 p.m. It also transpired that Steele's former sister-in-law, Phyllis Stanbrook, whose evidence that he'd been home around the supposed time of the murders, did so much to support his version of events, had not been asked to give evidence or make a statement until a few months before the trial. She was clearly critical, so why wasn't she contacted sooner? That question was intriguing enough on its own, but when Andrew Monday QC began to question her about how she could be so sure of the date she and her daughter visited Steele's house, her answer surprised everyone. "That's the day the solicitor told me it was," she admitted. "Let's say he spoke to you on March the 1st, said Monday. "If I'd asked you on February the 28th, or what date you went round to see Mr. Steele, what would you have said?" Miss Stanbrook paused for a moment, then replied, "I would have said I can't recall." When it came to Jack Wilmes, his recollection of shouting through the letterbox of his uncle's home seemed equally flawed. While in the witness box, he repeatedly told in great detail how he bent down, held the slot open with his hands, and shouted through the door. Andrew Monday then showed Wilmes and the jury pictures of the door in question. It had no letterbox. As for the supposedly broken down Passat that Wilmes had picked up for Darren Nichols, the court heard from a local car breaker who gave a very different version of events. The day after the murder, Wilmes had driven the vehicle to the man's scrapyard and told him, "Do what you like with it, just as long as there's nothing left that can come back to me." Rather than destroying it, the man checked the vehicle out and found that it still had some life in it. He sold it on. Then there was the evidence of Billy Jasper. Soon after his arrest, police in Chelmsford had contacted Ivan Dibley with the news that a man in custody was confessing an involvement with the triple murder. By mid-July, Dibley and his team had already gathered a wealth of evidence against Michael Steele that pointed to him being the killer. Jasper's story was intriguing, but failed to fit in with much of the evidence gathered thus far. A quick check into Jasper's background provided an answer. He had a history of confessing to crimes that he had nothing to do with. A self-confessed drug addict who admitted that he spent £400 a day on heroin and crack cocaine. He clearly found it difficult to distinguish between fantasy and reality. "He was such a Walter Mitty, we just couldn't take anything he said seriously," said Ivan Dibley. "We looked into his claims, but there wasn't much substance. We told Chelmsford police to continue the investigation and to let us know if anything came of it. Nothing ever did. That only left a mystery of why, if Jasper was lying, the members of the East End gang he had fingered for the crime had done nothing to shut him up. Although he had named them during his original police interviews, Jasper refused to name anyone in court, claiming he was too scared of reprisals. But even when the names eventually came out in the open, Jesse Gale, who later died in a car crash in May 1988, and Mr. D did not seem overly worried about being linked to the crime. In fact, dozens of villains all across the country were happy for people to think they might have been involved. In a world where double crosses and rip-offs are becoming increasingly common, the kudos of having wiped out 3 of the country's most dangerous men and having got away with it is undoubtedly the best protection of all. Just after midday, on Thursday the 15th of January, the jury of 8 women and 4 men retired to consider its verdict. As Steele and Wilmes waited anxiously in their cells below, the news came just before 4 p.m. that they had failed to reach a verdict. The jury was sent to a hotel and told to return to court the next day. The next day it happened again, and the jury were told to return to court on Saturday to see if they could reach a verdict. By the middle of Saturday afternoon, it was clear they would not, and their stay at the hotel was extended yet again. Mr. Justice Hidden decided to give them the Sunday off, hoping to give the jury the chance to relax by taking them all out on an organised trip. They returned on Monday happy, but still unable to agree, and stayed at the hotel yet again. In any criminal case, reading a jury is almost impossible. Some say the longer the deliberations go on, the more likely the verdict will be not guilty. Others say extended deliberations show that not all members of the jury are in agreement and are attempting to convince one another of their version of the truth. But often, as the case with the Retterdon trial, it is simply that the jury are going over every item of evidence before taking their vote. They ask for additional material, to see certain pictures, to read transcripts of certain interviews once more. On Tuesday, 20th of January 1998, after 5 full days of deliberation, the jury returned its unanimous verdict: guilty. Back in the court, Worms and Steele glanced at each other for a moment, then both shrugged their shoulders, then looked back to the judge. "There is no other sentence I can pass on you for those horrifying murders of which you have been convicted than that of life imprisonment," Justice Hidden told the pair. "There is little that can be said usefully about either of you at this stage. You two were responsible, in my view, for taking away the lives of these 3 victims in a summary way. You lured them to a quiet farm track and executed them. They had crossed your path and you showed them no mercy. There is about these killings a hard and ruthless edge, which can only horrify and stagger the non-criminal mind. You are extremely dangerous men, and you have not the slightest compunction for resorting to extreme violence when you thought it was necessary. Both men were told they would serve a minimum of 15 years. It took a while for the shock to settle in, but as the pair travelled back to Belmarsh, Steele tried to look on the bright side. "Don't worry, Jack. I'll make sure wherever we end up, we do the time together. At least we'll have that." Worms turned to face Steele, holding his stare for a second or two before he spoke. "Fuck off. I never want to see you again." In September 1998, Darren Nichols found himself back in custody as he gave evidence at Woolwich Crown Court, as Russell Tate and 6 others faced trial for drug smuggling. Although they were intimately involved in bringing the cannabis across the English Channel and transporting it to the garage owned by Steele's mother, it had long been decided that Steele and Worms would not face trial themselves. They were already serving 15 years for murder, and even if they were convicted, the additional sentence would be concurrent. It would be a pointless exercise, and the cost of the security operation needed to bring them to the court, let alone to keep Steele and Russell Tate separate in the dock, made the whole thing pointless. There is also the fact that if Steele and Worms had appeared, the jury would have not been able to know about their previous convictions. All the evidence gathered as a result of the murder investigation would not be admissible. As it was, the Customs trial turned out to be something of a non-event, with Nichols appearing in the witness box for less than 2 days. Even without his testimony, the evidence was overwhelming. There was film of meetings between Steele, Tate and others. There was mobile phone records showing the convoy had travelled down to Spain through France and then returned to Blankenberg on at least 3 occasions. There was footage from a thermal imaging camera that had followed Steele's boat as it had left the Suffolk coast, picked up the drugs in Belgium and then returned. There were surveillance reports of Worms' Range Rover meeting the boat and removing the cannabis. Finally, there was £500,000 worth of cannabis that had been found in Steele's possession under a blanket in his mum's garage. The only excitement came when Russell Tate himself took the stand. Faced with a mass of rock-solid evidence that he had been wholly aware of and intimately involved in the plot to smuggle cannabis, his defence had to be a stunning one, and it was. In front of an astonished court, Tate explained that he knew all along that Steele had killed his brother and had only got involved with him to bring him to justice. Tate believed that by friending Steele through the joint smuggling venture, he might eventually leave some clue or drop some hint that gave away his involvement in the murders. Then, and only then, did Tate plan to go to the police. It was a great tale, but one that no one could be expected to take seriously. As Mr. Justice Geoffrey Rucker said during his sentencing after the 6 weeks trial, Tate had prepared an ingenious story as a way of explaining his involvement in the conspiracy, but it did not simply bear the scrutiny of common sense and day-to-day experience of life. It was wholly untrue. In listening to the evidence, I do not for a moment believe that Tate had ever suspected Steele of murdering his brother. After being found guilty, Tate was jailed for 5 years. Paul Gwinnett was given 4 years, while Craig Androlopoulos received 2. Tate's lover Sarah Darliston, a childhood friend Tracy Ralston, and Ian Kerr were each jailed for 30 months. Michael James, who'd been filmed meeting with Steele on at least one occasion, was acquitted. On Friday the 13th of November, 1998, Darren Nichols returned to custody one last time before making a brief appearance at Woolwich Crown Court before Justice Hidden for his sentencing. I have no doubt that without the evidence provided by this man, a terrible crime would have been solved and 2 killers would still be walking the streets. In return, Mr. Nichols will undoubtedly have to spend the rest of his life in fear. I have no hesitation in awarding him full credit for the assistance he provided both police and customs in this matter. Nichols was sentenced to 15 months. The time he had already served in prison whilst awaiting trial more than covered it. He had paid his debt to society. He had become a free man. On the 26th of January 1999, representatives of Michael Steele and Jack Worms appeared at the High Court to ask for leave for appeal against their convictions. Outside the court, friends and family fixed banners to the railings declaring their innocence, but it was not to be. After a 5-hour hearing, Lord Bingham, the Lord Chief Justice, Mr. Justice Kennedy, and Mr. Justice Jackson concluded there was no evidence to suggest the convictions were unsafe. As their supporters chanted fix, relatives of Worms spoke to the ranks of waiting reporters and photographers. "He'll cry for a week when we tell him," said John Worms. "We will carry on campaigning and the campaign will get bigger." And indeed it has. In May 1999, Jackie Street finally broke her silence and told the Basildon Echo she was investigating every avenue in her fight to get her common-law husband released. "We are looking at every possible channel," she said. "They did not commit these murders, and both Michael Steele and Jack Worms protest their innocence." Michael is determined and absolutely resolved that the truth will eventually come out, and he will never give up. With other avenues exhausted, Steele was trying new tactics, putting the blame on his representation in court and complaining to the legal ombudsman. If it is found that he was not properly represented, then he will automatically have leave to go to appeal, Street added. An application was also being made to the Criminal Cases Review Committee, the European Court of Human Rights, and Steele was even looking at taking out private prosecutions against some of the police officers involved in the case. "I know he's no saint, but he did not murder these 3 men, Street continued. "He has committed a number of crimes in the past, and he has paid for them. The evidence is there that he is innocent, but we just need someone to listen. I've had everything taken away from me. I have no means of support, and I'm living on benefits. My main aim in life is to get Michael home, and I will never give up. In order to be free, he would have to admit his guilt. He would never do that. He would rather die in prison than admit to something that he did not do." On May 14th, 1996, Darren Nichols, a little-known petty criminal from Braintree, Essex, disappeared from the face of the earth. But it wasn't until the 2nd of March 1999 that he finally officially became someone else. There was no ceremony or celebration that day that the police turned up with his new passport and driving licence. Just a quick handshake and a request that in future he stay out of trouble. Today, Darren Nichols lives somewhere in the United Kingdom, in an average house, on an average street, where nothing, least of all Darren Nichols himself, stands out from the crowd. He and his wife both work in reasonable interesting jobs, have a growing circle of friends, and are slowly saving up for a second car. No one has a real idea about his past, what he has been through, and the things he has seen. And that's just the way he intends to keep it.